Hey guys, welcome back to the Red Bed. Today I've got over 3 hours of real-life Reddit stories to listen to while you fall asleep, or even just to have on in the background. They're mostly about entitled people and how others get revenge on them in the most satisfying ways. And while you listen, I'll be sharing some hardcore gameplay I got today where I visit a friend at spawn, build an automatic crop farm, complete my armadillo XP farm, and basically just improve the area and my tools. I'm trying to post these videos daily, so if you're enjoying them, make sure to subscribe. But anyways, kick back, relax, and enjoy. This first story is about a woman who thought she could take over a drive-thru, threw a tantrum when things didn't go her way, and ended up facing the police. Not long ago, I stopped at Chick-fil-A. It had been years since I'd been, and I was looking forward to grabbing food. At this location, they've got 2 separate drive-thru lanes, one for regular orders and one for mobile orders where you can skip the line if you've already placed an order in the app and have a QR code ready. I usually use the mobile lane because it's faster and more efficient. On this day, I thought I'd be in and out quickly. As soon as I pulled into the lot, I noticed a red flag. A woman in an SUV cut me off sharply to get ahead. I didn't think much of it at first. Annoying, but not the end of the world. Then I realized she had pulled directly into the mobile order lane. At first that didn't seem like a huge deal, until I noticed she wasn't holding her phone. She wasn't scanning a code, and she clearly hadn't used the app. Instead, she sat there leaning out her window and waving at the attendants like they were supposed to magically take her order. The mobile lane doesn't work that way. It's automated. No one monitors it unless you scan. After a moment, she started laying on the horn, blasting it over and over until one of the employees finally came over. The poor guy hadn't even reached her car before she started barking out her order. And not a quick order either. She rattled off food for what sounded like an entire army, barely taking a breath. Then, without paying, she tried to drive off toward the window. The employee literally had to run after her to get her payment before she moved on. I was stuck behind her this entire time, even though I'd already scanned my code and was ready to go. When she reached the pickup window, an employee politely asked her to pull forward into one of the waiting spots so the rest of us could get our food while hers was still being prepared. She flat out refused. Her excuse? It always takes longer if I pull around. The worker tried to explain how their food stations work, telling her it wouldn't slow her order down at all. But she cut him off and insisted, "It's not really fair to prepare their orders before mine when I was here first." The staff kept calm, even though it was obvious she was holding up everyone else. Another employee gently explained again that pulling ahead would let others grab their ready food while hers was still being cooked. She interrupted with, "They should all be working on the first person's order. I know you just make minimum wage, but this really shouldn't be that hard to understand." I could feel the tension from inside my car. The people behind me were honking, heads sticking out of windows, everyone clearly frustrated. Finally, the manager himself came to the window. He leaned out, polite as ever, and asked her to please pull forward. He even promised to personally bring her food to her car as soon as it was ready. And to sweeten the deal, he offered her a complimentary peppermint shake. That's when she crossed the line. She slapped the shake out of his hand. It went flying everywhere, splattering on him inside the window, across the counter. Total chaos. And instead of apologizing, she had the nerve to beep her horn at him again. At that moment, karma showed up. A pair of police officers walked around the front of the building toward her car. She actually laughed, rolling her eyes at the manager and saying, "You really called the police?" The manager calmly shook his head. "No, ma'am. They were inside the store when I walked past, covered in the shake you knocked over. They heard the shouting and honking too. I told them it was fine, but they wanted to come check it out themselves." The officers approached her car and told her clearly if she didn't pull forward and talk to them, she'd be arrested for assault, and they'd move her car themselves. Finally, she shifted gears and pulled around. But instead of stopping, she hit the gas and sped straight out of the lot. The whole line was stunned for a second. Then people started laughing. Her vanity plate was impossible to miss, bold letters that stuck in your memory. The officers looked at the manager and said they'd be charging her with obstruction of justice for failing to comply with a lawful order. I never found out exactly what happened after, but that was one drive-through experience I won't forget. That's the end of this story. It's wild how someone can turn a simple drive-through order into a full meltdown. The patience of those employees really stood out. I don't think I could have stayed that calm through all of it. The detail about the shake going everywhere honestly feels like a scene straight out of a sitcom. What was really funny though was how the cops just happened to already be there and caught everything. It's one of those moments where karma didn't take long at all to show up. This next story is about parents who tried to hand over one son's house to the younger brother with a wife and kids, telling him he could just live out back in a camper. I'm in my early 30s, single, and living on my own. My younger brother, who's 29, has 4 kids already, and his wife and I have never gotten along. She's the type who thrives on drama, always trying to get under my skin, and then if I ever defended myself, she'd instantly flip into victim mode. She could cry on cue, and she knew how to put on a show that pulled sympathy from anyone watching. My parents absolutely adored her, even though they knew exactly how manipulative she was. She also refuses to get a job, even though she has a degree, and my mom practically raises her kids during the day. So everything in their lives is funded by my brother's paycheck. Because of that, they've never been able to afford living anywhere on their own. They've been at my parents' house for years now, all packed into a small 3-bedroom home from the 1960s. Privacy doesn't exist there, but somehow my parents don't care. Growing up, it was always obvious my brother was the favorite. He got away with everything, while I got punished for the smallest things. If he picked on me and I pushed back, I was the one in trouble. If I had something good, he found a way to take it or ruin it, and my parents would tell me to suck it up. He even relentlessly flirted with my first girlfriend until she dumped me, and when I complained, I was told to stop being dramatic. My parents only treated me equally when other relatives were around to watch. Otherwise, my brother got the better gifts, the bigger share, and more freedom. By the time I turned 18, I couldn't take it anymore. I moved out before even finishing high school. Couch surfing with friends felt easier than being in that house. They didn't even show up for my graduation. From that point on, I saw them mostly on holidays, and even then, it was only out of obligation. When the pandemic hit in 2020, my life flipped upside down. I lost my job, my roommate moved out, and I couldn't keep paying rent on the condo I loved. I had to sell almost everything I owned just to stay afloat. At one point, I asked my parents if I could stay on their property, just park a camper there while I got back on my feet. They said no, unless I paid rent so high, I may as well have gotten an apartment. I was jobless, clinging to unemployment checks, and trying to survive. So I bought a $1,000 camper, strapped it onto my truck, and started living out of it. That first night sleeping in a parking lot was terrifying. I sat awake, convinced someone was going to try and break in. I didn't sleep much at all. Finding places to stay was a constant struggle. Sometimes I parked on quiet streets, other times in store lots, always with the fear that someone would bang on my door and tell me to move. And a lot of times, people did. I dealt with everything from random strangers threatening me to someone claiming to be part of an HOA, even though I wasn't parked near any houses. I moved constantly just to avoid trouble. Keeping power was its own challenge. I had a solar bank for my phone, but for my camper batteries, I ran an extension cord whenever I could, plugging into random outdoor outlets to keep my fridge running. I know that wasn't the best thing to do, but it was either that or let my food spoil. For bathrooms, I relied on public restrooms or the gym when I had access. Showers came from friends' apartments or the fitness center too. Since my camper only had a small portable toilet, I didn't want to deal with emptying. Months went by like that. It was exhausting, lonely, and humbling, but eventually I managed to land a job, and the boss there was surprisingly kind. He let me park the camper in the back lot of the company building, way in the old employees section no one used anymore. He even let me hook up to power and water. In return, I worked Sundays for free when the office was closed. That arrangement saved me. I worked almost every day, learned new skills, and after a while, I was promoted to supervisor. With the promotion came better pay, and I finally started saving again. That's when I decided to buy a house. I was done with instability. After searching, I found a 3-bedroom manufactured home just a couple miles from work. I scraped together the down payment, got approved for the loan, and moved in. For the first time in years, I wasn't living out of a camper. I even parked the camper in my backyard just in case I wanted to use it again. Excited, I posted about it on social media. That was my mistake, because not long after, my parents, my brother, and his family showed up uninvited. I never gave them my address, so I still don't know how they found it. They shoved their way inside, looked around like they were touring a model home, and made constant comments about how much space I had. My sister-in-law kept flashing me this smug smirk. At the time, I didn't know why. Later, I realized she already knew what they were planning. After a while, my brother asked to speak privately. Everyone else conveniently stepped outside, leaving just the two of us. That's when he told me straight out that my house was too much for me. Since he had a wife, 4 kids, and another baby on the way, he said it made more sense for him and his family to move in. He told me I could just live in the camper out back. He never mentioned rent, never offered anything in return. He just acted like it was already settled. I pulled out my phone and started recording. He didn't even notice. He kept going on and on, saying this was happening because our parents already agreed I'd do it. He even tried to shake my hand like it was a done deal. That's when I lost it. I stood up, raised my voice for the first time in years, and told him no, loudly. He stumbled back, shocked. I told him I worked hard for this house, I earned it, and there was no way I was giving it up. He got in my face, yelling that I didn't deserve it because I had no wife or kids. I told him that was ridiculous. Just because he kept having children didn't mean I owed him a home. Right then, my parents and his wife came back inside. They surrounded me, repeating the same phrase over and over. Do it for Dan. They said it like a command, like I didn't have a choice. My sister-in-law screamed about how she was pregnant and I couldn't do this to her. At one point, she snapped and actually hit me in the face, trying to claw at me before my brother held her back. I held up my phone and told them I had it all recorded. If they didn't leave, I'd call the police. That was the breaking point. They stormed out, my mom saying I had a week to come to my senses. I told her I wouldn't. Not now, not ever. That was my house, and no one was taking it from me. That story wraps up here. It's unbelievable how far family entitlement can go. The way they all acted like it was already decided is honestly surreal. I can't even imagine the pressure of having your own parents tell you to give up your house. What really stands out is how he didn't cave, even when they ganged up on him. That takes some serious strength. And honestly, it's probably one of those moments you never forget. This next story is about a sister-in-law who stole a baby name out of spite, only to regret it when everything backfired on her. My wife and I are both 33, and after 4 years of trying to have a child, we were finally blessed with a baby boy. It hadn't been an easy journey, and to be honest, we had almost given up. When we found out the pregnancy had stuck, we were ecstatic. After learning we were having a son, we started thinking about names. I suggested naming him after my Scottish grandfather, and my wife loved the idea. It felt meaningful, tied to family history, and something we both connected to deeply. Now my wife has a younger half-sister, who she's kept low contact with for years. This woman is entitled, toxic, and the golden child of her mother. There's history here. My wife and her mother once tried to steal my wife's jewelry box, which contained valuable heirlooms from her grandmother. After that, we stopped letting either of them into our home. The jewelry has been kept in a safety deposit box ever since. Despite all of that, we made the mistake of announcing our chosen baby name on social media. As it turned out, my wife's half-sister was also pregnant, a few months further along, and also expecting a boy. Almost immediately, she swooped in and declared that she would be using the exact same name for her own son. And she didn't stop at the first name. She took the middle name too. We called her to confront her, furious about what she was doing. She just laughed smugly and told us there was nothing we could do about it. And in a way, she was right. It's not illegal to steal someone else's planned baby name. But I told her straight, while what she did was underhanded, we weren't changing our decision. We'd still use the name, and she could deal with it. Not long after, her boyfriend, who I'll just call her Baby Daddy, phoned me to say I was being unreasonable. He told me we couldn't use the name now that they had claimed it. I told him they didn't own anything. Before hanging up, he tried to threaten me, saying I'd be sorry if we didn't change the name. I just shook my head. Months passed, and she gave birth first. Sure enough, she named her son after my grandfather. We didn't bother showing up for the birth. Between the pandemic and our total lack of interest, it wasn't happening. She called demanding congratulations. Instead, we told her we didn't care, and that if she still thought we'd change our choice, she was in for disappointment. My wife chimed in, agreeing with me completely. After that, the sister-in-law started bombarding us with emails, long lists of alternative names she thought we should use instead. We ignored them all. Then came our turn. 2 months later, our son was born. Perfect and healthy, and we named him exactly as we had always intended. Not long after, she called us screaming that we had copied her. I told her it was the other way around. She had copied us. We had family ties to the name. She had none. Anyone could see the truth just by looking at our family tree. My wife added that after the jewelry incident, she no longer considered her a sister and wanted nothing to do with her nephew. For months, messages poured in from extended family. Some sided with us, others took her side. Her boyfriend eventually made good on his earlier threat by showing up at my door. He was short, skinny, baby-faced, and barely grew a beard. I'm 6'1" and go to the gym 3 times a week. He didn't exactly intimidate me. I told him my house had cameras, and he needed to get off my property. He yelled a few insults before leaving in his beat-up car. Not long after, my mother-in-law and sister-in-law called us again from another number, angry that I had humiliated him. I told them I hadn't threatened him, just told him to leave. Then they tried to bring up the baby name again, insisting we change it since our son was still young. I laughed. They were delusional if they thought they were in the right. I reminded them she hadn't chosen the name out of love, but out of spite. My wife then confronted them about the way she was treated growing up, about how entitled they both were, and made it clear she wanted nothing to do with them. We went no contact again. But sometime later, my sister-in-law bitterly called us to say we had won. Apparently, she and her boyfriend had a huge fight. He was angry that she hadn't let him choose a name from his own family. He said he was sick of her drama and demanded the baby's name be changed. She caved, and they reissued the birth certificate with an entirely new name. She claimed it cost her about $500. Then, unbelievably, she demanded that we pay her back for the cost of the change, plus an extra $100 for emotional damage. We laughed and told her she brought it on herself. Since then, we've stayed no contact with her and with my mother-in-law. The only one from that side of the family we see is my father-in-law, who's divorced from my mother-in-law and a genuinely kind man. He visits often and loves spending time with his grandson. As for the drama with my sister-in-law, we've washed our hands of it. Not our monkeys, not our circus. That story stops there. It's wild how far some people will go just to create drama when there was never a need for it. The whole name battle says a lot about what her priorities were, and it clearly wasn't about the child. What really stood out was how calmly they held their ground and didn't let themselves get dragged into endless back and forths. The part with the boyfriend showing up at the door almost felt surreal, like something straight out of a bad movie. And in the end, it's almost ironic that all of her scheming came right back to bite her. This next story is about a jealous older brother who tried to muscle his way into a new homeowner's life, demanding a room on the cheap and dragging their mom along to pressure him. I didn't plan on becoming a homeowner when I did. It kind of fell into my lap. A close friend's grandfather was moving to Florida, and his place, an older manufactured home with a separate garage, was suddenly available. I knew the man well. He was the type who'd wave from the porch with a mug of coffee and ask if your tires needed air. He wanted the house to go to someone who would actually care for it, and he offered it to me at $200,000. I had $30,000 saved, so I sprinted to the bank, got the loan, and said yes. The house isn't flashy. It's a solid place from the 1980s that had been remodeled again and again by someone who knew what they were doing. New siding, a fresh roof, clean wiring, and that detached garage I could tinker in. To me, it felt like peace. After years of apartment living and a breakup I'd rather not unpack right now, unlocking my own front door felt like stepping into the calm part of a song. I could park my truck, roll the camper off the hitch if I wanted, and finally spread out without tripping over storage bins. My older brother did not take the news well. To put it gently, he has a copycat streak. Over the years, he mirrored almost everything I did. I bought a camping cot. He suddenly needed a camping cot. I signed up at a gym. He just happened to join one too. I saved for a better television. He showed up with one he swore was bigger. I got a truck. He found a truck. I found a quiet campground I liked, and, surprise, he booked the same spot the next weekend. It became a running joke in my head. I do a thing. He does the thing. He tells me his version is cooler. The house, though, that was different. You can't mirror decent credit or steady income overnight. When he found out I closed, he blew up. He accused me of buying a home to make him look bad. I told him I bought it because the price was right and I wanted stability. That answer didn't help. In his mind, every good thing I did was secretly about him. After a while, he pivoted to what he called a brilliant idea. He wanted to move in with me. At first, I honestly thought he was joking. Then he followed up by offering to rent a spare room for $200 a month. Utilities included because we're family. I told him no. Calmly at first, then firmly, then very firmly. He got mad enough to loop in our parents. Our mom showed up with him at my place like it was a surprise inspection. The two of them stood on my porch, my brother wearing this smug little grin, my mother looking determined, and told me I should let him move in. The script was predictable. You've got the space now. He just needs a little help. It's only fair. I said no again, and I meant it. Mom didn't take that well. She teared up. She said I was being unkind. She tried to twist it into me punishing my brother. I called our dad on speaker. Dad listened, sighed, and told Mom exactly what I'd already said, that I wasn't going to do it, that it was my house, and that she needed to respect the boundary. You could see my brother's face change when his go-to support didn't land the way he expected. To give you an idea of why I held the line, here's what living with my brother would look like in real life. Missing bottles from my pantry, borrowed tools never returned, door knocks at midnight because he forgot his key, and constant foot traffic in and out like the house had turned into a common room. He treats privacy like a suggestion, not a rule. Looking back on it now, I realized I'd be paying a full mortgage to feel like I was at someone else's party all the time. So I spelled it out. I wasn't doing the revolving door roommate thing with him. Not for $200 a month. Not for anything. He got red in the face. Mom tried one more round of, but he's your brother. And he's living in a camper right now, hoping it would soften me. I said I was sorry he didn't like his situation, but it wasn't mine to fix. They left in this awkward shuffle, him fuming, her half turning back every few steps like a guilt boomerang. A week later, I rented the spare bedroom to a close friend for $600 a month plus utilities. We drew up a simple agreement, set quiet hours, and it's been peaceful. There's a small storage room in the detached garage, and after a quick plywood makeover, I turned that into a separate room another friend rents. It's orderly, straightforward, and most importantly, respectful. When Mom found out, she tried to pivot. If not the house, then maybe the garage for my brother? I still said no. Boundaries don't work if you only half keep them. My brother did not handle any of that with grace. He staged what can only be called a performance meltdown at our parents' place. He ranted about being the older brother, about how he should have owned a house first, about how I was supposed to be the one in his shadow, not the other way around. Dad, who walks with a cane now, tapped it on the floor and told him life doesn't hand out keys based on birth order. That turned into a bigger argument, and they told him to leave until he could cool off. After that, things went quiet for a bit. I focused on simple homeowner stuff, the kind of routine that feels good when you've been waiting for it. Sweeping out the garage, labeling bins, replacing a leaky hose bib, learning which switch actually controls which light. I got used to the creak the back step makes when the sun hits it in the afternoon, and the way the kitchen smells faintly like cedar after a fresh wipe down. My brother tried a couple more angles over text. Short messages that swung between faux casual and not very subtle. I kept it polite and short. Eventually, I just muted the thread. After a final blow-up with our parents, he packed up his camper and left town. From what I'm told, there were a lot of big words thrown around about unfairness and who deserved what. I stayed out of it. I have cameras on the exterior and in the common areas, and a dash cam in the truck. He knows that. Nothing mysterious has happened on my property since. People sometimes ask if I feel bad about refusing him. The honest answer is no. I've lived enough to know the difference between helping and enabling. My house is where I sleep well, pay my bills, and keep the pantry stocked without labeling every jar. It's where I can roll out of bed on a Saturday, brew coffee, and decide whether to fix the sticking garage door or just sit on the front step and watch the neighborhood wake up. I worked for that peace, and I'm going to keep it. That's where the story ends. Jealousy can make even small wins feel like a personal attack to someone who's stuck. What I like here is how the boundary stayed steady the whole time, even when the pressure showed up at the door. Renting to friends with clear rules feels way smarter than hoping a chaotic roommate will suddenly be respectful. Also, the detail about learning the house's sounds like the step creak kind of says it all. That's the part you protect once you finally have it. This next story is about a mother on a long flight who thought a stranger should hand over his drink to her child just because he wanted it. I had just flown back from Dubai, and before the wheels had even lifted off the ground, I already had that sinking feeling. You know the one, when you glance at the seat next to you and realize your travel partner for the next several hours is an overworked parent and an energetic little kid. In my case, it was an entitled mother with her son, who looked about 5 or 6 years old. At first, I tried to keep an open mind. Maybe it wouldn't be so bad. I put in my headphones, shifted in my seat, and tried to prepare myself for the long haul. But it didn't take long before the kid was off and running, literally. He was zipping up and down the aisle like it was his personal playground, throwing toys, bumping into people, and dropping crumbs as he went. The flight attendants were clearly doing their best to stay polite, but you could see the tightness in their smiles. And his mom? She barely looked up from her phone. Every once in a while, she'd glance around and tell someone, "Oh, don't worry, he's just a kid," as if that excused everything. I decided to just grit my teeth and get through it. About halfway into the flight, I asked for a Coke. The flight attendant handed it to me, ice clinking softly in the plastic cup, condensation already forming on the outside. I hadn't even taken a sip when I noticed the boy's eyes lock onto it like a hawk. A second later, he was whining and pointing at my drink, bouncing in his seat and tugging at his mom's arm. I figured she'd ask the attendant for one of her own. After all, soft drinks are free on flights, and it would have taken 30 seconds. Instead, she leaned toward me with this annoyed expression and said, "He really wants your drink. Just give it to him." Her tone made it sound less like a request and more like an order. I was so stunned I almost laughed. I politely told her that if her son wanted a Coke, she could just ask the attendant. She rolled her eyes, muttered under her breath, and sat back with this exaggerated huff, like I'd committed some huge injustice. At that point, I decided to enjoy my soda very deliberately. I took slow, loud sips, let the ice rattle, and made sure she knew I wasn't about to cave in. A little while later, I ordered a second Coke, partly because I wanted one, partly because I knew it would drive her nuts. This time, when the attendant came by, the kid actually reached out and tried to grab the cup right out of her hand. The attendant pulled it back quickly, and then, in a low but firm voice, scolded the mom. She told her that her son needed to calm down and that she had to keep him under control. The mom's face turned red, and she puffed herself up like she was about to start arguing, but all she managed was a loud, frustrated sigh before sinking back into her seat. For the rest of the flight, she kept glaring at me like I was the one who had embarrassed her. Her son kept making noise, tossing toys around, and generally being a handful, but at least after that, he didn't try to swipe my drink again. I leaned back, put on some music, and just counted down the hours until landing, silently wondering how some parents can just check out and expect everyone else to pick up the slack. That's the end of this story. Airplanes really bring out people's entitlements sometimes. It's like the second they buckle in, some folks assume the rules of basic courtesy don't apply. What I like here is how the flight attendant finally stepped in. It shows the crew really does notice when things get out of hand. Honestly, it's a reminder that keeping your cool is way more effective than stooping to someone else's level. And sometimes just sipping your Coke slowly says everything that needs to be said. This next story is about a neighbor who felt entitled to family heirlooms after a grandmother's passing and even demanded to see a copy of her will. When my grandmother was diagnosed with cancer, she made a decision right away. No treatments. She'd already watched my grandfather go through chemo, radiation, and surgery, and she remembered how miserable that made him. She didn't want to live her last days in and out of hospitals. She wanted peace, and honestly, all of us in the family respected her for that. Over the following years, she got things in order in her own way. She started gifting items to family and friends. Sometimes she'd tell us to write our names on something, or she'd say, "If you want it, take it now." But there were also conditions. Certain things were clearly set aside. Heirlooms meant for my aunt's family, or keepsakes that my dad and his kids would inherit. She was very clear about what went where. So when she finally passed, there wasn't much confusion. Everyone knew what was staying in the family and who it was intended for. Her house itself went to my dad. But here's the part that broke us. Just 2 weeks later, my father suddenly and unexpectedly passed away as well. It was devastating. I barely had time to breathe from losing my grandmother before losing my dad too. The shock of it all still feels sharp, even when I think back on it. After his passing, the house came to me. I was still processing everything when the neighbor stepped in. The next door neighbor, we'll call him Todd, started showing up, and not just once, but several times, acting upset and entitled. First, he complained that he and his kids hadn't been invited to my grandmother's funeral, which was strange because we didn't even have a funeral. We were all too overwhelmed after losing my dad so quickly afterward. Then Todd demanded to see a copy of the will. He insisted his kids should have been included because, in his words, my grandma loved them like her own. That was absolutely not true. She had complained about them constantly, how they'd take her water to fill their pool, how she had to put locks on her faucets to keep them from draining it, and how they'd even called her grandma when she didn't feel that connection with them at all. It got worse. Todd asked me directly if I'd let his kids go through the house to see if there was anything they'd like to remember her by. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My grandmother had just died 4 weeks ago. My dad had died 2 weeks ago, and here was this man, practically a stranger, asking if his family could rummage through my grandmother's belongings like it was some kind of yard sale. I tried to be polite at first. I told him I had boxes of things I was planning to donate and offered to let them look through those. But instead of being grateful, he acted offended, like I had just insulted him. Then he doubled down. He said his kids had their hearts set on specific heirlooms, family pieces that had already been claimed by my relatives. I couldn't help it. I actually laughed in his face. I explained those items were family heirlooms, and they were staying in the family. Some of them had already gone home with my brother. Todd didn't back down. He puffed himself up and told me again that his kids were her family too, and they should have been included in the division of things. I had to remind him plainly, they weren't family. They were just the neighbors next door. They had never once been invited to a family gathering, never sat at the table during holidays, never shared in the traditions. The only time my grandmother ever mentioned them was when she was complaining about their behavior. He didn't like that answer, but the truth was undeniable. I held my ground, and that was the end of it. Eventually, Todd's house went into foreclosure, and he moved away about a year later. By then, the whole situation was behind us, but I still shake my head when I think about how brazen he was. That story wraps up here. It's wild how someone outside the family can convince themselves they're owed something just because they lived nearby. What stands out is how this all happened while the grief was still fresh. Like, the timing couldn't have been worse. It makes you appreciate how important it is to hold firm when someone's trying to take advantage. And honestly, sometimes the best response really is just to laugh at how absurd the demand is. This next story is about a woman who thought she owned the local park and tried to get a homeless man removed, only to have her plan completely backfire. A few months ago, I had one of those rare experiences where you actually watch karma unfold in real time. It happened at the little park near where I live, a place a lot of us from the neighborhood go to relax, walk our dogs, or just get some fresh air. There's a man who's been staying near the park for a while. I'll call him Tim. Tim doesn't have a permanent home, but he's not the kind of person who bothers anyone. If anything, he tries to make the place better. He cleans up trash, he keeps his little spot tidy, and he never goes around asking people for things. Sometimes folks bring him food or coffee, and he's always polite and thankful. Over time, most of us came to know him as part of the community, and no one had an issue with him being there. One afternoon, I was out walking my dog, and that's when I saw this woman heading straight for Tim. You could spot the energy from a distance. She had this stiff posture, like she was on a mission to complain about something. She had a fancy yoga mat under her arm, a small dog at her side, and that kind of glare that just screamed trouble. She stopped right in front of Tim, who was quietly sitting on his bench, and immediately, she started laying into him. She told him he didn't belong there, that he was ruining the view, and that he needed to get a job instead of sitting around. Her voice was sharp and cutting, the kind that carries across the park whether you want to hear it or not. Tim, to his credit, stayed completely calm. He told her he wasn't hurting anyone and that he had as much right to be in the park as anyone else. But she wasn't having it. She got louder, talking about how it was her park and how she was going to call the police to get him removed. The more she talked, the more people stopped what they were doing and started watching. Before long, a small crowd had formed, just trying to make sense of why this woman was making such a scene. A couple of us tried to step in and tell her to ease up, but she wasn't listening to anybody. She pulled out her phone and called the police, making it sound like Tim was some dangerous stranger who was harassing her. It was a complete lie, and everyone around knew it. After a while, 2 police officers showed up. And the moment they walked over, she launched right into her performance. She put on this victim act, saying she felt unsafe and threatened by Tim's presence. Meanwhile, Tim stayed exactly the same, calm, respectful, just quietly explaining that he was sitting in the park when she confronted him. And here's where everything turned. One of the officers took one look at Tim and said, "Oh, hey Tim, how's it going?" Just like that, you could tell they knew each other. The officer and Tim talked for a moment, and it was obvious that this cop had met him before and knew he wasn't a problem at all. Then the officer turned to the woman and, in a steady voice, told her, "Ma'am, this is a public park. Tim has every right to be here, just like you do." Her face changed instantly. She went from smug to panicked, sputtering excuses about how it wasn't right and how people like him shouldn't be in places like this. She kept pushing, asking if there was something they could do to get him removed. The officer didn't budge. He looked right at her and said, "Ma'am, if you keep causing a disturbance, you'll be the one removed from the park." The whole crowd went quiet for a second, just soaking it in, and then you could feel everyone smiling. It was one of those moments where the universe lines everything up perfectly. The woman grabbed her dog, huffed, puffed, and stomped away like a kid who didn't get her way. After she left, a few people went over to Tim to check on him and even gave him food and drinks as a show of support. The officers hung around for a little while, chatting with him and making sure everything was okay before moving on. And from then on, it felt like the whole neighborhood looked out for him a little more. That's where this story finishes. It's interesting how people can think their voice alone will give them authority over a situation. What really stood out here was how calm Tim stayed while all of this unfolded around him. It made the whole scene feel even more lopsided when the woman was losing her cool. And it's always good to see a crowd back someone up instead of letting the loudest person win. Moments like that kind of remind you that fairness does show up sometimes. This next story is about an entitled couple who threw a tantrum at a hotel check-in desk, only to end up making things better for someone else. Back in 2008, my partner and I decided to take a gay cruise through South America. To give you a picture, it was 3 days in Rio during Carnival, a full week of parties and fun on the water, and then wrapping everything up in Buenos Aires. For us, it felt like the kind of once-in-a-lifetime trip you save up for and never forget. Now, even though the world has changed a lot since then, back at that time, a cruise ship full of openly gay travelers pulling into certain ports was still a headline. Most people were friendly, but I couldn't help feeling like one wrong move from any of us would be remembered as a negative mark against the entire community. It sounds dramatic, but that was honestly the vibe in certain places. So there was this little weight of pressure to always be on good behavior. As for us, my partner and I were not wealthy travelers. We booked one of the cheapest inside cabins, the kind with no windows, because we wanted to spend the money we did have on experiences. But we did plan a small splurge at the end. After the cruise, we booked a few nights at a nice hotel in Buenos Aires. It felt like a reward after roughing it in the inside cabin. When we got to the hotel, it was clear we weren't the only ones with that idea. The lobby was already packed with other passengers from the ship, many of us still a little tired and hungover, but waiting patiently in line. It was only 10 in the morning, so we all knew check-in wasn't officially until later. The general plan was to drop our bags with the concierge, go grab some food, maybe walk around, and then come back later in the day. That's when the drama started. A couple behind us in line apparently decided that waiting like everyone else was beneath them. One of them loudly declared that he had some ultra-exclusive, diamond platinum, top-tier membership with the hotel, and that this meant they deserved early check-in immediately. The hotel clerk, who honestly had the patience of a saint, explained politely that early check-in depended on availability. At 10 in the morning, there simply weren't any rooms ready. It wasn't personal, it wasn't unfair, it was just reality. But this couple was not having it. They absolutely lost their cool right there in the lobby. They raised their voices. They accused the clerk of being incompetent. They even mocked her English, which was ridiculous because her English was excellent, just lightly accented, as you'd expect in Argentina. The whole scene had full Karen energy, but turned up to 11 with 2 people instead of 1. Security eventually had to step in to calm things down. By the time it was finally our turn at the desk, the poor clerk looked like she had just been through a storm. I felt genuinely bad for her, so I apologized on behalf of the behavior she had just endured. I told her no one should ever speak to her like that. We ended up having a short, pleasant chat about traveling, about the cruise, and just small things to reset the mood. I figured she was just putting our names down for later check-in like she had explained. But then she handed us 2 keys. Not for a regular room, for a suite. A massive suite with a beautiful view and access to a rooftop pool just down the hall. She gave me this little smile and said, "Enjoy your stay," with a wink. And enjoy we did. We spent the next few days in total comfort, enjoying that unexpected luxury upgrade. Every time we looked out at that view, I couldn't help but think about those 2 guys who screamed their way into nothing but embarrassment. If anything, their meltdown probably made our experience even sweeter. That's the end of this story. Sometimes you see people burn all their energy trying to push their way ahead, and it backfires beautifully. I think the best part here was how calm kindness ended up being rewarded without it even being the goal. It's also a reminder of how much of a difference one patient employee can make when they choose to rise above nonsense. The contrast between the tantrum and the outcome just makes the story stick even more. This next story is about 2 entitled siblings who disrupted an international flight with lies and tantrums, delaying everyone on board. I was on a flight from Iceland to Canada not too long ago, and what should have been a smooth takeoff turned into a mess thanks to 2 entitled brats. We were literally minutes away from leaving. The flight attendants were standing in the aisle, going through the standard safety demonstration. Everyone had buckled in, the cabin was quieting down, and then, out of nowhere, this girl jumps out of her seat. She cuts right in front of the attendant and blurts out that she left her purse back in the airport, with her passport inside. She was breathing fast, almost hyperventilating, waving her arms like it was an emergency. The attendant told her to sit down and calm herself while she went to speak with the crew. A few minutes later, another attendant comes over to follow up, and that's when the story changes. Now suddenly, the girl claims she does have her passport, but she desperately needs the purse because it contains important medication. The attendant, trying to help, calmly asks what kind of medication it is so they can see if they have it on board. Instead of answering, the girl snaps at her. She says, "It doesn't matter what kind of medication. I need my purse. I can't have this conversation right now." She waves her hand like she's too important to even explain. At this point, the crew checks with ground staff. They send people back to search the gate area where she swears she left the bag, but nothing turns up. Then things escalate even further. Her brother decides to get involved, and he immediately starts shouting. He jumps out of his seat, yelling at the crew that he should be allowed to go look for it himself. Keep in mind, the plane had already pulled back, and we were in line for takeoff. The crew firmly tells him that leaving the plane at that stage isn't possible. That's when he shouts that he's a pilot and knows what can be done. He even demands to speak to the captain directly. The audacity was unreal. Almost an hour later, after arguing nonstop, he storms back into the cabin. He gathers his carry-on bags, grabs his sister, and makes a dramatic little speech. He announces to everyone that his sister couldn't possibly survive the flight without her medication, and with that, they stormed off the aircraft. Honestly, the rest of us were just relieved. You could feel the tension drop in the cabin the second they left. People were muttering things like, "Good, just go already," because no one wanted to deal with them anymore. A little while later, the captain gets on the intercom to update us. He explains that the purse had been found, but it contained no medication whatsoever, nothing at all. And because of the lies and suspicious behavior, the crew had to treat the situation as a potential security risk. That meant everyone else on the plane now had to sit through a full sweep of the cabin, with attendants manually checking and confirming every passenger's belongings. They had to make absolutely sure those 2 hadn't left something dangerous or suspicious behind. The delay dragged on for over an hour. Families with little kids were restless, people missed connections, and the crew, who had been nothing but professional, looked absolutely exhausted. All because 2 entitled siblings thought they could manipulate an entire flight with made-up stories just to get their way. That's where the story ends. That kind of stunt is just exhausting to even hear about, never mind living through it. The way they shifted their stories so many times makes it obvious they were just trying to game the system. What stood out to me, though, was how patient the crew stayed, even with all the yelling and demands. It shows how much flight attendants deal with that passengers never see. And honestly, the way the rest of the plane just wanted them gone says everything. You can only push people's patience so far. This next story is about a man fed up with his nephews constantly stealing from him, until one final break-in pushed him to call the police and let them face real consequences. For a long time, I tried to put up with my nephew's nonsense, but this was the breaking point. I came home from work one day and instantly noticed something was wrong. My shed door was wide open, and the cheap padlock I always kept on it was smashed clean off. My stomach sank because I knew right away this wasn't some random accident. When I looked inside, the damage was obvious. So many things were gone. I'd been storing bags and bags of soda cans in that shed for over a year. To give you an idea, I drink a lot of soda, and my friends do too, so I'd saved up hundreds of cans with the plan of taking them to the bottle drop for one big payout. In my state, each can is worth 10 cents, so the stash was going to bring in close to $200 once I finally cashed it in. But those bags weren't the only things missing. My gardening shears were gone, a steel rake, 2 shovels, including one of those fold-up camping ones, an electric hedge trimmer, a small used chainsaw, my power drill, even a full 2-gallon gas can, and a machete. For whatever reason, they left behind the lawnmower, weed whacker, and extension cords, but the rest had been hauled away. I went straight to my security cameras, and there it was in black and white. My 3 nephews, ages 16, 15, and 14, breaking in with one of their dad's claw hammers. I recognized the hammer because it was bright yellow and black, the same ones my brother-in-law has a pile of. In just a few swings, they smashed the padlock, and then they made multiple trips. At first they carried things out by hand, and then they came back pushing shopping carts they must have stolen too. They didn't even bother closing the shed door when they were done. When I confronted my sister and brother-in-law about it, they immediately denied everything. But then I pulled out the camera footage, and there was no denying it anymore. They went from pretending to be mad at their kids to being more concerned that the boys had skipped school to commit the theft. Turns out the kids spent the whole day dragging those cans to the bottle drop, cashing them out in batches, and then blowing the money on video games and junk food. I told my sister and her husband they owed me $200 plus the destroyed lock. At first they pretended to be furious at the kids, but then they turned it around and got mad at me. They made excuses about having 3 kids and a mortgage and acted like I was being heartless for expecting repayment. I gave them 2 days to figure it out before I went to the police. In the meantime, I got most of my stolen tools back, but the gas had already been used up. And while I waited, my phone blew up with calls and texts. My sister, my brother-in-law, even my nephews themselves were sending messages. The cycle went like this: fake apologies, guilt trips about family, threats, and then back around again. My oldest nephew even sent me a picture of himself flipping me off while holding a soda can, like he thought the whole thing was a joke. The last straw came when my sister told me I'd tempted her kids by having all those cans in my shed, as if I was somehow to blame for storing recyclables on my own property. That was it. I went down to the police station, handed over the video footage, the broken lock, all the texts, even the photo my nephew sent. I made it crystal clear this wasn't the first time either. They'd stolen food, movies, games, even broke into my house once, and left a disgusting mess behind. That was why I'd secretly installed cameras in the first place. The police didn't brush it off. In fact, they took it very seriously. My nephews were arrested at their house, and I heard from a neighbor that the cocky attitudes disappeared fast once the handcuffs went on. They cried like little kids as they were taken away. Now they're facing charges of larceny, property destruction, and harassment. Word spread quickly, and neighbors who'd also had cans go missing started whispering about how maybe these 3 had been responsible all along. My sister and brother-in-law were furious, of course. They came pounding on my door, screaming that I ruined their boys' lives. I refused to open the door and reminded them this was their own fault for never holding the kids accountable. Eventually they left, but not before blowing up my phone again. This time, I didn't block them. I saved every message because I plan to take them to small claims court. It's not even about the money anymore. I want them to finally understand there are consequences, and I'll be pushing for community service because I know how much those boys hate work. Maybe a few 100 hours of cleaning up trash or doing chores they can't escape from will finally teach them what their parents never did. That's the end of this story. Hearing how long this went on, it feels like it was bound to explode eventually. The nephews were testing boundaries over and over, And every time they got away with it, they just pushed further. What stands out most is how the parents twisted things to avoid responsibility, even blaming the shed full of cans instead of the kids. It's wild how people can rationalize anything when they don't want to face the truth. Honestly, I think community service is exactly the kind of outcome that could shake them awake. This next story is about a store clerk who helped a kid buy his snack, only to be confronted by an entitled man demanding she buy his cigarettes. Back when I worked at a small town convenience store, I pretty much knew every single customer who walked through the door. It wasn't a busy place, more like one of those stores where people popped in for the same things day after day. One of my regulars was this 12-year-old kid. Every school day, like clockwork, he'd ride up on his bike, park it outside, and come in for the same order: a chocolate milk and a little pack of cheese crackers. The total came out to $2.08 after tax. He always paid with loose change, like it was straight out of his piggy bank. Sometimes he had nickels, sometimes quarters, sometimes it was mostly pennies, but he always had enough. Then one day, he came in looking like the world had just chewed him up and spit him out. Shoulders slumped, dragging his feet, no smile. He grabbed his usual milk and crackers, but when he counted out his coins on the counter, he was short about 10 cents. I could see the disappointment hit his face. Without saying much, he picked up the crackers like he was about to put them back. And that's when I reached into my pocket, pulled out a dime, and slid it across the counter. I told him not to worry, that he was all good, and to enjoy his snack. He looked up at me with this big smile, thanked me, and left looking so much lighter than when he came in. It was one of those tiny moments that just felt worth it. The very next customer was another regular, but this one couldn't have been more different. He was a man in his 40s, always came in for the same thing, a pack of cigarettes. I rang them up, told him the total, and that's when he smirked and said, "Well, aren't you paying for it?" At first I thought he was joking, so I just said no. But he doubled down, raising his voice, saying if I was buying things for customers, I should buy his cigarettes too. Everyone in line had just seen what happened with the kid, so they knew exactly what he was talking about. I told him straight up that there's a difference between helping a kid who was just a few cents short on his snack and a grown man demanding I buy his smokes. He didn't like that answer. He started yelling louder about favoritism, really trying to make a scene. I just looked him dead in the eye and said, "Yeah, and?" That shut him up for about half a second before he exploded with insults. At that point, I'd had enough. I calmly reached over, grabbed the cigarettes, and put them back on the shelf. He shouted, "What are you doing? I'm buying those." And I said, "Not today, and not from me. Please leave." That's when he tried to reach across the counter at me. Instinctively, I stepped back. Normally, my belly wasn't visible because I was short and the counter came up high. But when I stepped back, it was obvious. I was about 7 months pregnant. I wasn't trying to reveal anything, just getting out of reach. But the customers behind him immediately reacted. They started shouting at him, furious that he was lunging at a pregnant woman over cigarettes. The pressure of all those angry voices was enough to make him back off. He stormed out in a huff, and from that day on, he stopped being a regular. And then something really wholesome happened. The very next customer, who had been watching the whole thing, put an extra $1 on the counter and said it was for the kids' after-school snacks. The customer after him did the same, and then the next one. Before long, I had to set up a jar for it. People were happily tossing in change and bills just so that 12-year-old could keep getting his chocolate milk without worrying. By the time I went on maternity leave, that kid had enjoyed free chocolate milk for almost a month. That's where the story ends. That whole shift from tension to kindness is such a wild contrast. The man walked in ready to demand something he didn't deserve, but the customers right after him turned it into something positive instead. It's kind of cool how a small act, like covering 10 cents, spiraled into a whole community looking out for a kid. And honestly, I think that kid's smile probably meant more than anything the guy with the cigarettes ever could have gotten. This next story is about a woman in a supermarket who tried to push another shopper out of their wheelchair and take it for herself. I was at a rural Shaw's supermarket, one of those stores that claims to give you discounts with their club card, but really it's just inflated prices marked back down. Still, they carried a few things I couldn't get anywhere else, like my favorite caffeine fix and the dog food my pups liked, so I had no choice but to shop there. At the time, I was relying on my power chair more often. It's an Eagle HD foldable model, and it had become a lifeline for me after dealing with some heavy post-COVID fatigue on top of joint issues I already had. It wasn't something I used lightly, but on days when I needed it, it made all the difference. So there I was, leaning forward in the chair, trying to grab a flat of Monster Energy drinks to slide under the rack beneath my seat. Out of nowhere, I felt a push against my back. At first I thought maybe someone brushed me by accident, but then I heard a voice right behind me say, "I need that. You don't. You're younger." I was stunned. Luckily, I was still belted into the chair, or that push might have knocked me right out. I whipped around and told her, "What the heck?" She didn't even flinch. Instead, she shook the back of my chair like it was just some dining chair she could drag out of her way and said, "You can use the scooter. The chair's better and I'm old." And then she actually pointed at the store's beat-up motorized scooter she had been riding. I just stared at her, completely shocked, before finally saying, "This is my wheelchair. Get away from me." But she didn't stop. She doubled down, saying, "You can't use personal stuff in supermarkets. Give me the chair." And with every word, she shook it harder, like she thought she could just rattle me loose. At that point, I had no patience left. I cranked the chair to max speed and bolted. She either had to let go or get dragged face first across the tile because I wasn't sticking around to argue. So now picture the dumbest chase scene you can imagine. Me in my power chair zipping across the store while behind me, on the slowest scooter known to mankind, this woman is sputtering and shouting, "Get back here." It was so ridiculous that even while I was angry, I couldn't believe what I was experiencing. I headed straight to the service desk, cut in front of the line, and quickly explained, "I'm sorry, really sorry, but there's a woman following me trying to push me out of my chair and take it." And as if to confirm everything, the entire desk and line of customers heard her wheezing behind me with the loud, sluggish buzz of the scooter motor. They let me into the little back office behind the counter, while everyone else just watched her slow-motion arrival. And I mean slow. It took a full 20 seconds for her to roll across the store, her face red, glasses hanging crooked off one ear, all while she kept shouting about how I didn't need the chair and how she deserved it because she was older and more disabled. When she finally reached the desk, the staff stayed calm. They explained firmly that the chair wasn't store property, it was mine, and if she kept trying to grab it, they'd have no choice but to call the police. She barked back, insisting that everyone knew you couldn't bring personal equipment into a supermarket, so clearly the staff were lying to her. The second employee at the desk leaned in and said, with just the right amount of attitude, "Lady, why do you think we care if someone brings a wheelchair into the supermarket?" Something shifted in her face at that moment. Maybe it was embarrassment. Maybe she finally realized the entire line of customers was staring daggers at her, but she froze. Then, like nothing had happened, she suddenly asked where the artichokes were. I nearly choked trying not to laugh. The worker just blinked at her before finally pointing back toward produce and saying, "Over there." And with that, she rolled away as if the last 10 minutes hadn't just happened. For the rest of my trip, I made sure to steer clear of whatever aisle she was in, just in case she tried grabbing me again. Looking back, the whole thing feels like an absurd comedy sketch, but at the time, it was infuriating and exhausting. That's the end of the story. The mental image of her creeping across the store in that scooter while yelling is almost cartoonish. I can only imagine how surreal that must have felt in the moment. It's one of those situations where you're angry at the time, but later realize it's just absurdly funny. And honestly, the way she pivoted from trying to steal a wheelchair to asking about artichokes still cracks me up. This next story is about a group of hikers who blocked a private driveway on ranch land and ended up facing consequences they definitely didn't expect. I live on a pretty large ranch in Montana, about 4,800 acres. I'm not a rancher myself, and I don't pretend to be. I inherited the property, and most of the land is leased out to people who actually know how to run cattle and handle the day-to-day work. My part is just maintaining what I can and making sure everything stays in good order. When I first took possession, I wanted to make sure the boundaries were all properly marked, so I had a surveyor review them. After that, I hopped on my ATV and rode the perimeter, checking the fence line and making sure all the no trespassing signs were up according to law. I met the neighbors, kept things friendly, and just tried to enjoy the peace and quiet of the place. Now, the driveway to my house is long, about 1.25 miles of graded gravel road from the gate on the public road back to my house. It's a private drive with drainage ditches on both sides, so once you're on it, there's no pulling off to the side. You either drive in or you're stuck blocking the way. One afternoon, I was coming back from town when I found 3 cars parked right across my driveway, completely blocking me in. There was no way around them. Because of the ditches on both sides, there was no way to sneak by either. I climbed up on my truck just to see if maybe the owners were nearby, but there was nobody in sight. And since my house was still 3/4 of a mile further down the road, I couldn't just walk in and leave them there. My first thought was simple: chain them up and drag them out of the way with my truck. But then I realized that if I did that without a witness, I might end up getting blamed for whatever damage happened. So instead, I called the sheriff's office. Luckily, the deputy who covered my side of the county was close by and showed up in about half an hour. When he pulled up, he called me by name. I work as an emergency physician at the local hospital, so I know most of the first responders in the area. He asked me what was going on, and I pointed to the vehicles. I explained that I came home, found them blocking the road, and couldn't get past. He told me he could ticket them and order a tow, but the nearest tow truck was at least 2 hours away. Then he looked at me and said, "Why don't we just tow them out of the way ourselves?" That's what I had been thinking too. So with him there as a witness, we hooked chains to the cars and pulled them off to the side. It tore up the gravel road a bit, which was frustrating since I just paid to have it regraded, but at least I could get through to my house. The next morning, the cars were still there, and the morning after that, they were still there. By day 3, I'd had enough. I drove back out with cribbing blocks and a high lift jack, and I lifted each car up and set it on the cribbing so the wheels were hanging off the ground. They weren't going anywhere unless someone lowered them back down. It took 2 more days before anyone came back. 8 people showed up, all red-faced and furious that their cars had basically been immobilized. They complained loudly, saying I had no right to touch their vehicles. I told them flat out they owed me for parking and for the damage to my road. They insisted they didn't know it was private property. I just looked at them and said, "You had to drive through a closed gate covered in signs that said no trespassing? Don't tell me you didn't know." They threatened to call the police, and I told them to go right ahead. Funny enough, their phones were all dead from backpacking, so they demanded I call for them. So I did. And who shows up again? The same deputy, Bob. Since he already knew the situation, their complaints didn't get them very far. He trespassed them, escorted them off my property, and made them wait on the public road for the tow truck. The tow truck took 4 hours to get there, and it cost them $500 per vehicle to have them lowered and hauled to the public road. Meanwhile, I got all my cribbing back, and the sheriff had their names, license numbers, and registrations written down in his report. About a month later, I got notice that they were suing me. I wasn't worried. I countersued in local court. My lawyer laughed at their claims, and so did the judge. Not only did their lawsuit get dismissed, but the judge ordered them to pay for resurfacing the road again, along with storage fees and punitive damages. They threatened to appeal, but my lawyer explained that appeals in Montana go straight to the state Supreme Court, which could take 3 years just to be scheduled, and the odds of them winning were slim. In the end, it took about a year, but I received the payments. The last check came in just last week, and you know what I did with the money? I put it toward my annual summer barbecue for the county's emergency responders. 2 days of smoked brisket, games for the kids, swimming in the pool and the stream. Basically a way to thank the people who keep our little community safe. Living in a small town has its challenges, but moments like that remind me why I'd never trade it for city life. That story wraps up here. It's kind of wild how people can just ignore gates and signs like they don't mean anything. The mental picture of those cars sitting up on cribbing makes me laugh, though. Honestly, it's one of those stories where the small town connections really paid off. And I think it's pretty great that the money ended up going towards something for the whole community instead of just sitting in a pocket. This next story is about a restaurant worker dealing with an entitled customer who stole a decorated reserved table meant for a couple's special night. I work at a small, cozy little bistro in town. It's not super upscale or anything, but we've got this great location and not a whole lot of tables, which means we stay booked almost every night. Because of that, reservations are pretty common, and every now and then someone will reach out with a special request. Sometimes it's someone wanting a private corner for an anniversary, or maybe asking if they can add some decorations for a birthday. Most of the time, these requests are really sweet, and honestly, we love helping make them happen. So a few weeks back, we got an email from this woman who wanted to surprise her boyfriend with a special evening. She didn't ask for much. All she wanted was a more private table, tucked away if possible, and she even offered to pay in advance. She also mentioned wanting to add a personal touch of her own, just a small item that had some meaning for them. To us, that was no problem at all. On the day of the reservation, we set up one of our little corner nooks. It's still open to the restaurant, but you can't really see into it unless you're right there. We dressed it up with string lights, candles, and some flowers. It looked really nice, kind of magical, and you could tell it was set apart for something special. The woman even came by earlier that day to put up her personal item, and it was clear how much thought she had put into making the moment perfect. Fast forward to that evening. The couple arrives, and I'm already smiling because I know exactly who they are and what's waiting for them. I grab their menus, walk them toward their reserved table, and then my stomach just drops. Sitting right there, in the decorated nook, is an older woman with a little boy. They had their bags and jackets thrown across the table, drinks already out like they had just claimed the space. Now, here's the kicker. This table had 3 signs. One that said, "Please wait to be seated." Another that clearly said, "Closed for private event." And right on the table itself, a reserved sign. These two walked past all of it, ignored every rule, and sat down anyway. At first I thought maybe they didn't understand, or maybe they just weren't paying attention. So I approached politely, trying to explain that the table was reserved and that they needed to move. I barely got the words out before the older woman cut me off. She launched into this loud rant about how no one seated them, how she had been waiting too long, and how they had every right to sit wherever they wanted. I tried to stay calm. I explained again that the table was reserved and that every other table in the restaurant was fully booked, but she wasn't listening. She just kept repeating how all the other restaurants nearby were full and how she wasn't about to leave. She pointed at the kid and made it sound like I was trying to kick them out onto the street. Meanwhile, the couple was standing right behind me, watching their decorated table get ruined before they even had a chance to sit down. The kid, by the way, had already started messing with a little personal item the woman had left earlier. It wasn't expensive or anything, but you could tell it meant a lot, and watching someone else's child tamper with it just added insult to injury. It took both me and my coworker stepping in, and even then, it was a full-on argument. We told her point blank that if she didn't move, we'd have to call the police. That finally did it. She huffed, puffed, and complained the whole way out, but eventually she grabbed her grandson and stormed off. By then, though, the damage was already done. The couple still sat at the table, but the surprise atmosphere the woman had planned was basically ruined. I could see it in her face. Her excitement had turned into disappointment. She didn't blame us, and she was gracious about it, but it was obvious how much effort she had put into making this night special. That shift stuck with me. I've always heard stories about entitled people in the service industry, but living through it firsthand, it's something else entirely. I'm just a student working here part-time for extra money, but moments like that really make me respect the people who deal with this every single day. That's where this story ends. It's tough when someone's thoughtfulness gets stomped on by pure selfishness. You can just imagine how disheartening that was for the couple, especially after all that effort. I think what makes it worse is how easy it would have been for the lady to just respect the signs like everyone else. It leaves you shaking your head at how far some people will go just to put themselves first. This next story is about a sister who ropes friends into stealing a bike as payback over a petty family fight about eating at a hospital cafeteria, and a family that keeps enabling her until everything blows up. I didn't think a lunch spot could start a family crisis, but here we are. I work near a hospital, and on days I don't pack a meal, I stroll over to the cafeteria. It's calm, the food is decent, and the prices beat most places around me. I like the quiet hum of trays and soft conversation. It feels like a reset in the middle of the day. When my sister found out, she acted like I'd broken some law of humanity. She told me hospital food was for people who need to be there, and I told her I wasn't taking a sandwich out of anyone's hand. It should have ended there. Instead, she pulled my parents in, and they lined up behind her like always. They said it was inappropriate, that I should stop, that it was weird. I don't live with them anymore, which is exactly why I left. Everything turns into a vote where she wins. I went online and asked the community for a read, r/AITAH, and the replies were mostly, "You're fine. People eat at hospital cafeterias all the time." That gave me a bit of peace. I tried to let it pass, but then my phone rang. It was my sister asking if I'd stopped going. I said no because I hadn't. Cue round 2, then round 3, with my parents calling me like I'd broken curfew. She decided to widen the circle. Relatives started hearing her version, and it backfired. My uncle called and told my parents, very directly, that they've been playing favorites for years. My cousin even met me for lunch at the cafeteria, liked it, and said he'd probably make it a weekly thing. He's a cyclist and works nearby, so it fits his day. I could tell that drove my sister up a wall. My parents eventually backed down, probably because they got called out. They apologized, then told my sister to apologize. She did, but it sounded like every word had to squeeze past clenched teeth. After that, my parents invited me to dinner. Turkey night, my favorite. I love the drumsticks with way too much gravy, and they know it. The food was great. The vibe was giggly. My sister kept laughing at nothing. I thought she was just in a better mood. Then I went to grab my bike from the backyard. Gone. I park it out of sight, always. It's how I get everywhere. No bus line fits my schedule, and I like riding. My parents looked worried. My sister looked thrilled. That grin told me what I needed to know. I said I was heading next door to ask about their cameras, and then calling the police. That wiped the smile off her face fast. She tried the innocent act, the shocked act, the "how could you accuse me" act. I walked for the door anyway, phone in hand. She finally cracked and called me back. My parents looked stunned because they'd just finished defending her. She admitted she'd asked a couple friends to swing by during dinner and borrow my bike. She said they were just down the street in a minivan, no big deal, easy to return, don't call anyone, we're family. I headed for the door again. My sister trailed me, crying now, asking me not to make a big deal out of a prank. My parents tried to slow me down, then stopped. We all waited. She called her friends and ran to her room, whispering. The longer we waited, the more anxious she looked. She kept texting. We all kept staring at the gate. Almost an hour later, a minivan rolled up. 2 of her friends stepped out, legs muddy nearly to the knees. They popped the back and dragged my bike out. It looked like it had been dunked in a swamp. Wet, streaked with silt, chain-dripping brown water. My water bottle was missing. The headlight was filled with moisture. I started recording on my phone and asked them to tell me exactly what happened. I reminded them the neighbors have cameras. They broke down quickly. My sister had asked them to get rid of it, take it to a pond a few miles away, and toss it. They did. When my sister realized I was going to check cameras and call the police, she panicked and made them go back for it. That's where the mud came from. I had them repeat it in front of my parents. The look on my mother's face said it all. My father went very quiet. My sister slid to the floor and started crying hard, pounding her fists and kicking like a little kid. It was surreal, like watching a time machine spit out a tantrum from 10 years ago. After a minute, she ran to her room and slammed the door. Her friends got told they were never welcome at the house again. Then came the apologies. My sister got hauled back out by my mother and was told to say sorry properly. My dad told her that wasn't enough and walked her outside. He handed her a bucket, rags, and a bottle of oil, then stood there while she cleaned the bike from grip to derailleur. I took the headlight apart and cleaned the inside so it could dry. It took hours. It was dark when we finished. She came in with this look like I was the villain in a movie. My parents shut that down and said they'd never been more embarrassed in their lives. When things calmed, I had a frank talk with my parents. I told them she'd been treated like the lead character for so long that the rest of us became props. Every time she pushed a boundary, someone else absorbed the fallout. I said I was done being the safety net. For once, no one argued. My father drove me and the bike back to my apartment and, quietly, pressed a little cash into my hand so I could replace the water bottle. The next wave came by phone. Unknown numbers. Long texts calling me heartless for making her cry over a prank. I replied with what actually happened and mentioned that I had the admission on video. Word traveled. On her campus, people joked that if you chained a bike near her, it might disappear after an apology. She came home and cried for 3 days straight. My parents called, trying to angle it back toward me. Maybe I could smooth things over. Maybe I could say something. I reminded them what we just talked about. She chose the prank. She picked the pond. She made the mess. It wasn't on me to clean it up. Since then, everyone's acting like it never happened. My parents are polite. My sister and her friends steer clear. My bike rides fine. The headlight survived. And at lunch, sometimes I still sit by the cafeteria window with a basic sandwich and a quiet room and enjoy the kind of peace that shouldn't be a battlefield for anyone. That's the end of this story. Family drama over something as simple as lunch can tell you a lot about how people treat each other when they don't get their way. I'm glad the truth came out without the police getting involved, but that got close. The image of that muddy bike rolling back in is going to live in my head for a while. For now, I'm just rooting for calm days, steady rides, and lunches where nobody turns a sandwich into a debate. This next story is about a traveling nurse friend whose short-term stay quickly turned into an overwhelming situation filled with surprise demands, unexpected guests, and even car troubles. Back when my wife and I were living on the Big Island in Hawaii, life was fairly relaxed. We had our house set up, routines dialed in, and things were pretty smooth. Then, one afternoon, I got a call out of the blue from an old friend named Lana. She had once lived on Oahu, but had since moved to San Diego, and now she was working as a traveling nurse. On the phone, Lana explained that she had to make a decision immediately about a new contract. It was either going to be on the East Coast or right there on the Big Island. The catch was that she only had about 30 minutes to lock it in, and she wanted to know if she could stay with us for 3 months while working there. She said she'd pay rent, and since it was a short stay and we hadn't seen her in a while, I asked my wife. My wife thought it would be nice to reconnect, so we agreed. But that's when the first curveball hit. Lana casually added, "Oh, by the way, my boyfriend will be coming too." That hadn't been mentioned before, and as if that wasn't enough, she added another detail. "Also, I'll need to use a car. I can't afford a rental because I already have a $500 car payment back in California." I remember feeling caught off guard. At first, we'd just agreed to host her, which seemed manageable, but suddenly, it was 2 people, 1 car, and a much bigger ask. Still, we tried to keep an open mind. Before arriving, Lana even asked if we drank coffee. When I said yes, she told us she brewed a 12-cup pot every day. That should have been a small red flag, but we brushed it off. Sure enough, once she arrived, she plowed through all of our Kona coffee in the first week. And if you know anything about Kona coffee, you know it isn't cheap. It was running about $18 a pound at the time. Her boyfriend, to be fair, seemed like a nice enough guy when they showed up. He was polite, said thank you, and didn't give us any trouble at first. But another wrinkle popped up almost immediately. Since Lana worked 12-hour shifts, her boyfriend would need to drive her back and forth. It sounded fine in theory, until I sat down and did the math. The hospital was 60 miles away from our house, one way. That meant 120 miles for a round trip. And since he had to drop her off and then come back later to pick her up, he'd be doubling that every day. That worked out to around 240 miles daily on our car. Over the course of a week, it would rack up to nearly 1,000 miles. I couldn't help but picture the odometer climbing, oil changes being pushed closer, and tires wearing thin. Then came another request. Lana mentioned that while she was at work, her boyfriend planned to spend the day fishing in town. That didn't bother me at first, until she asked if we knew where he could get some marijuana. She explained casually that he liked to smoke while he fished. That stopped me cold. Not only were they already using our car daily for long-distance commutes, but now he wanted to take it out while stoned, on winding island roads. That was way too much to ask. My wife and I brought it up with her. We told Lana that the whole situation felt like it was getting out of hand. What started as a simple favor had snowballed into free housing, a borrowed car racking up hundreds of miles a week, and now a boyfriend using it for all kinds of side trips. She didn't take it well. Arguments followed, and within a week, she decided to move out and rent a place closer to the hospital. Honestly, we were relieved. But the car issue still wasn't over. She agreed to rent her own vehicle, but kept holding on to ours longer than she should have. At one point, we had to reach out just to ask when she'd return it. When she finally did, there was no heads up, no conversation, just a short text that read, "It's in your driveway." That was it. No rent for the week she stayed with us, no gas money, no acknowledgement of how much she'd taken advantage of us. Just silence. Looking back, I realized that sometimes friends can act more entitled than strangers, simply because they expect their history with you to excuse everything. And in Lana's case, that sense of entitlement was stronger than I ever expected. That story wraps up here. Hosting friends can be a gamble. Sometimes it turns into a great memory, and other times it feels like you're suddenly running a hotel and a car rental service at the same time. What stuck out most here was just how quickly the situation shifted from simple to overwhelming. It makes me appreciate the people who are upfront, respectful, and self-sufficient when they visit. This next story is about a man who was accused by a stranger of kidnapping his own stepson, leading to a terrifying scene in a grocery store when the woman actually tried to snatch the child away from him. About a week ago, I went through one of the most stressful and surreal experiences of my life. Even now, I still find myself replaying it in my head, trying to process that it really happened. For context, I'm a mixed ethnicity guy. My father is Caucasian, my mother is African American, and because of that mix, I've got straight hair. People have often tried to guess my background, and growing up in Texas, I was frequently mistaken for being Mexican. It never bothered me much, and since moving to Massachusetts, it really hadn't been an issue. Until this day. I'm married to a Caucasian woman who had a child before we met. His biological father isn't really in the picture, but I stepped in because I love my wife, and I love this little boy as if he were my own. I've been in his life since he was 1, and now he's 4. To him, I am dad. To me, he is my son. On this particular day, my wife had errands to run and needed groceries. Normally, she handles those while I'm sleeping since I work nights, but I was awake and wanted to give her a break. So I told her to relax and let me handle it. Plus, it gave me a chance to spend some extra bonding time with my son. We knocked out a couple of small errands first, then headed to the grocery store. He's a ball of energy, like most 4-year-olds. As we went down one of the aisles, he ran ahead a little, laughing and saying hi to people. I usually let him as long as he stays where I can see him. At the end of the aisle, he ran into an older woman. With his usual cheerful personality, he said, "Hi, me 4 and me Ryan." She leaned down and told him he shouldn't be unattended, that they should go find his parents. I wasn't alarmed. She probably just hadn't seen me a few steps back. I called him, and he ran right back to me, clinging to my leg while spinning in little circles. I kept scanning the shelves for canned corn, not giving it another thought. But then I realized the woman had followed me and was standing behind me. I brushed it off again until I pushed my cart toward the registers, and she suddenly blocked my way. At first, I thought it was just an accident. I said, "Excuse me," and tried to go around, but she moved her cart in front of mine again. That's when things took a sharp turn. She looked me dead in the eye and said, "You're not going anywhere with that child." I froze, not understanding what she was trying to say. Then it hit me. She thought I was kidnapping him. I tried to keep calm and replied, "You mean my son?" She shot back, "That's not your child. He's white, you're Mexican. You probably didn't even know his name until he told me." My patience was thinning. I told her my wife was at home waiting for us, but she accused me of lying, even calling me a pervert. My son was clinging tighter to me now, looking scared. I tried again to explain, but she wasn't having it. She bent down toward him and said, "Come on, sweetie. I'm here to rescue you. Come with me." Before I even realized what was happening, she grabbed him and started running down the aisle. For a split second, I was frozen in shock. Then I bolted after her, yelling for people to stop her. My son was screaming at the top of his lungs, reaching for me, terrified. The woman kept saying, "Don't worry, I'll protect you from him." Thankfully, an employee managed to block her path before she could reach the exit. She insisted I was trying to kidnap her grandson, but my son was crying for me, arms outstretched. Even then, she wouldn't let go until he slapped her in the face. I couldn't believe the scene unfolding. The manager showed up, and she immediately tried to spin the story, calling me a pervert and saying she was saving her grandson. I pulled out my phone and showed pictures of me and my son together over the years, but she claimed I faked them. To make matters worse, 2 other older women backed her up, saying there was no way I could be related to him because of our skin tones. One of them even called the police. Honestly, I was relieved, because I knew the security footage would clear everything up. While waiting, I called my wife and told her to come. She got there around the same time as the police. As soon as she walked in, my son cried out, "Mama, help!" My wife went into full mama bear mode, furious at seeing this stranger clutching our child. The woman still tried to spin it, saying she was protecting him from me. The other 2 women backed her up, insisting I should be arrested. But when my wife pointed at me and said, "Oh, you mean my husband?" the entire situation started crumbling. We both showed IDs, family photos, everything. The cops looked over the evidence and weren't buying the story anymore. The nail in the coffin was when the officer asked the manager about cameras. Yes, the store had them. And once the footage was reviewed, it showed exactly what happened. Me walking in with my son, shopping with him, and then her snatching him and running. The officer asked me if I wanted to press charges, and I said absolutely. The woman was charged with attempted kidnapping, child endangerment, false imprisonment, and filing a false police report. The two women who lied for her were also charged for false reporting. To top it off, because she grabbed him so hard she left bruises, she was hit with child abuse charges too. My son is okay now, though it shook him up. Court is still pending, but at least the truth came out. That's the end of this story. The whole thing sounds exhausting just to live through, let alone retell. It's wild how quickly a normal trip to the store can flip into chaos when someone jumps to conclusions. I can only imagine how overwhelming it must have felt in the moment, especially with a little kid caught in the middle. Situations like that make me grateful for security cameras and clear evidence, because without them it would have been a nightmare to prove. This next story is about a pushy realtor who tried to treat a pregnant neighbor like her personal housekeeper and snow shoveler. A few winters back, my neighbors had to move away rather suddenly. They hadn't sold their house yet, so it sat empty for a while. Since we'd always gotten along well, they asked if I could do little things to make the place look lived in, like flipping on lights now and then, or shoveling the walkway if it snowed. I didn't mind at all. They've been great neighbors, and honestly, it felt like a small favor I could easily return. At that time, though, my own plate was pretty full. I had a toddler, a baby, and I was around 7 months pregnant with my third. My husband traveled a lot for work, so for about 2 weeks out of every month, it was just me managing the kids and the house on my own. I was definitely running on limited energy. Not long after the move, the realtor handling their sale showed up. She introduced herself as Ronnie, thanked me for helping, and seemed fine enough at first. Somehow she also got my phone number, probably from my old neighbors. That's when the texts started rolling in. At first they were framed as requests. She'd message me asking if I could dust the house a bit, or make sure specific lights were on before a showing. I thought maybe it was just a one-time thing, so I agreed the first time. I waddled over there, swiffered around, and switched on the lights she wanted. Later, Ronnie texted me again, this time to say she was disappointed that the place still looked dusty. That rubbed me the wrong way. I was doing her a favor, not auditioning for a cleaning service. I ignored the message, but it didn't stop. Suddenly, Ronnie expected me to prep the house every single time she had a showing. She'd text almost daily with little orders, like I was her assistant. The truth was, I had 2 kids under the age of 2, plus a pregnancy that was considered high risk. I wasn't on bed rest, but I did need to be careful. The last thing I was going to do was play realtor's helper. I ignored more and more of her requests. Then came the real kicker. We had one of those heavy snowfalls. Thick, wet snow, the kind people call heart attack snow. We got about 1.5 feet overnight. At 8 o'clock that evening, Ronnie texted me saying the driveway needed to be cleared by morning for a showing. That one set me off. I texted her back asking if she was out of her mind, because I was 7 months pregnant and absolutely not shoveling that. She asked if my husband could do it. I told her he was out of town. Then she replied, "Well, you'll have to figure something out." That was it for me. I sent her nothing but laughing emojis and went on with my night. The next morning, there was a pounding at my door. So loud and forceful it felt like the cops. I opened the door in my pajamas, balancing my baby on my belly as he nursed. Ronnie was standing there, actually glaring at me. She had the audacity to say, "I thought I told you the driveway needed to be cleared. I have a showing in half an hour." I just stared at her for a second, then told her to lose my number. I shut the door right in her face. After that, I called my old neighbors and told them flat out they needed to rein in their realtor, because I was done dealing with her nonsense. They were horrified and promised to take care of it. And just like that, the text stopped. The best part? I watched from my window as Ronnie had to hike her way through all that snow in her fancy shoes, high-stepping just to get to the house. I can't lie, I enjoyed that view. That story wraps up here. It's kind of wild how quickly some people start treating favors like obligations. You think you're just being neighborly, and suddenly someone's acting like you signed a contract. I like that she handled it with a straight shutdown instead of trying to argue. Sometimes the simplest no is the strongest response. and the image of that realtor trudging through the snow probably made the whole headache a little more satisfying. This next story is about a strict teacher who mistook a student's medical device for headphones and ended up cutting his insulin pump tube in front of the whole class. Back when I was in middle school, around 2011, I was living with type 1 diabetes. I'd been diagnosed at age 4, so by then it was just part of my life. I used both a continuous glucose monitor and an insulin pump. If you're not familiar with pumps, mine had a little tube that connected from the device in my pocket to the site on my body. It was basically a lifeline, and all my teachers had been told about it. I even had an IEP in place, which meant I was allowed to check my blood sugar, pull out the pump, give myself insulin, or drink juice whenever I needed to, no questions asked. Most teachers understood. Sometimes they'd forget and think I was messing with a phone, but as soon as I reminded them, they'd nod and let it go. But there was one teacher who was known for being unnecessarily strict and, honestly, kind of cruel. She had this reputation for making kids cry during presentations. I'll never forget her telling one girl, who dreamed of being a doctor so she could cure her sister's cancer, that she'd have to actually be smart to do that. We were 12. That's the type of person she was. Naturally, she was also at war with technology. Instead of just saying no phones in class, she would make these cryptic comments about how she knew kids were sneaky and how she could see everything. It always felt like she was trying to catch someone in the act, instead of just teaching. One day, I was sitting at my desk taking notes, while my pump tube ran from my waist to my pocket like it always did. I wasn't thinking anything of it. She started walking around, making her usual comments about how some students think they can get away with listening to music in class. I figured she must have seen somebody with headphones, because I wasn't listening to anything. The next thing I know, I felt something tug at my side. She had snuck up behind me with scissors. In one quick motion, she snipped the tubing of my insulin pump. For a moment, I was frozen in shock. I just sat there with my mouth open, trying to process what had just happened. No teacher had ever touched my pump before, let alone cut it. It took me a second to realize that she thought she was cutting headphone wires. She marched back to the front of the class and smirked, asking if I wanted to share what music was more important than her lesson. My brain finally caught up, and I told her just the sound of my thoughts, since that was my insulin pump. That's when it clicked for her. She let me go to my locker to grab my emergency phone, a little prepaid one my mom gave me strictly to call her in situations like this. I called home, and my mom drove over immediately with a new infusion set. By then, I was sitting in the office waiting for her, still in disbelief. When my mom arrived, she was calm but furious, in that terrifying way only parents can be. She asked to see the teacher in the office, and when the principal and special education rep showed up too, she laid into them. She explained that cutting off my insulin pump wasn't just a mistake, it was a direct violation of my IEP, and basically, an attack on the medical equipment keeping me alive. She made it crystal clear how reckless that was, how expensive pumps were, and how dangerous it could have been if more damage was done. The teacher apologized. She admitted she forgot I had a pump, said she was sorry, and told me I had done nothing wrong. She also apologized to my parents and even offered to pay for the supplies she ruined, but my parents declined. Instead, they pushed for every teacher to get more education about diabetes and accommodations. The school agreed, and I stayed in her class, though I never looked at her the same again. To this day, I can still picture the moment those scissors closed around that tube. That's where this story ends. It's crazy how something so small can mean the difference between safety and a full-blown emergency. What stands out to me is how calm his mom stayed while still making her point loud and clear. That kind of composure probably scared the teacher more than yelling ever could. I also can't imagine trying to sit through class after something like that, just being a kid and having to process it. Honestly, it's a reminder that sometimes adults don't always act like the responsible ones in the room. This next story is about a passenger on a flight who tried to steal someone else's paid seat, only to have the situation flip back on him in front of the entire plane. I was flying to Las Vegas to meet up with some friends. Because of my disability, I had specifically booked a window seat that came with extra legroom. The airline charges extra for those seats, about $45 plus tax, and I'd paid that ahead of time so I could actually be comfortable on the flight. When I boarded, I walked down the aisle, checked my ticket, and froze. There was a man sitting in my seat. Another man, clearly his friend, was in the aisle seat, and the middle seat was the only one left open. Both of them were tall, easily 6 feet or more, probably over 200 pounds each. I'm petite, and the moment I spoke up, I could already tell they were used to using their size to push people around. Still, I stayed calm. I leaned down a little and politely told the man in the window seat that it was mine, and asked him to move. Before he could even answer, his friend in the aisle jumped in. He told me the man didn't have to move, and that I should just sit in the middle. He even added that I shouldn't make a scene. That's when my patience started to wear thin. I wasn't raising my voice, I wasn't being rude. I was simply asking for the seat I had paid extra money for. So I told him again, politely but firmly, that I wasn't making a scene. I was asking for what was mine. The guy in the aisle stood up at that point, trying to use his height to intimidate me. But the thing is, I've worked in frontline healthcare for years. I've dealt with angry, aggressive patients and families before. Men trying to loom over me or shout me down. It doesn't rattle me anymore. So I decided to change my approach. I turned directly to the man in the window seat and made him an offer. I told him, I'll make you a deal. You give me $50 cash and I'll let you keep that seat. I explained that I had paid an extra $45 for it, and with taxes, it came to about $50. If he wanted it, he could compensate me, and we'd be square. The look on his face was priceless. He blinked at me and said, almost offended, "You want me to pay you $50 for your seat?" I just raised my eyebrows and replied, "So you admit this isn't your seat then? In that case, I'll just call the airline staff and they can escort you to the one you actually paid for, because I booked this seat for my disability needs, and you're trying to steal it." That shut him up fast. And what made it worse for him was that everyone around us had been watching the whole exchange. People were staring at him, and their expressions weren't friendly. He immediately turned bright red, like 14 different shades of it, and without saying another word, slid over into the middle seat where he belonged. He yanked his hoodie up over his head, slouched down, and sulked for the entire flight. His friend in the aisle didn't look much happier. Meanwhile, I got to enjoy the seat I had reserved and paid for, just like I was supposed to. That's where the story ends. That was such a satisfying way to handle it. Instead of getting angry or loud, flipping it into a business deal put the whole thing on blast. The guy outed himself the second he reacted. I also love that the crowd got involved without actually saying anything. Just the weight of those stares was enough to make him back down. Honestly, the hoodie sulking for the rest of the flight is the funniest detail. It's like he couldn't decide if he was embarrassed or just mad he didn't get away with it. This next story is about an entitled client who thought they could control everything, only to find out that professionals don't have to put up with that kind of treatment. I work as an engineer, and while my main job keeps me plenty busy, I sometimes do a bit of consulting on the side. Usually it's only for people I know personally or as a favor for a friend. I don't advertise myself, and I definitely don't go looking for extra clients. I value my free time too much for that. One day, a good friend of mine asked if I could help out his in-laws. They were taking on some major renovations and additions to an older home, and he thought my input could be useful. At first, I was hesitant. The project sounded like a can of worms, especially with the age of the house and the kinds of changes they wanted. But since he was a good friend, I reluctantly agreed. Before I even started, my friend warned me that his mother-in-law could be a bit unpleasant. That turned out to be the understatement of the year. From the very beginning, she acted like I was her personal servant. It didn't seem to matter that I was charging a fraction of what a real consulting firm would have billed them, probably around 1/10 of the normal rate. To her, money meant control, and she thought snapping her fingers was enough to get me to jump. Our early interactions were tolerable, though not exactly pleasant. She'd send me these curt, borderline rude emails whenever I pointed out problems in their renovation plans. I brushed it off, figuring I could deal with a little attitude if it meant helping out my friend's family. But things took a sharp turn when I needed to schedule an on-site visit. Because of my full-time job, I told her I could only stop by in the evenings or on weekends. That's just the reality when I'm doing side work. At first, she brushed off the weekend idea. Then she turned down evening visits too. Instead, she insisted that I had to show up during my normal office hours, because that was what worked best for her schedule. I calmly explained that wasn't possible. I had a full-time job, and consulting was something I fit in during my free time. The moment she realized I wasn't going to bend, she completely lost it. Her tone shifted from rude to openly hostile. She told me that because she was paying me, I was required to work on her terms, not mine. She made it sound like I owed her my weekdays because of the little she was paying me. At that point, I'd had enough. I looped my friend into the email chain and told them both I was done. I wasn't going to waste my evenings or weekends being treated like garbage. My friend apologized for her behavior, but I told him it was fine. It just wasn't my problem anymore. The mother-in-law, however, couldn't believe I was serious. She emailed me back, shocked that I was walking away. She even lectured me, saying that this isn't how business is conducted. I didn't even bother replying. I wasn't running a business, I was doing a favor, and she had managed to make even that favor not worth the trouble. About 3 weeks later, I got another email, this time from her husband. His message was more polite. He asked if I would reconsider helping them out and even promised that his wife would not be involved in any way. I guess reality had finally hit them. Through the grapevine, mostly from my friend, I found out what happened next. They had started reaching out to proper companies for quotes, but because it was such a busy season in the industry, wait times were long and costs were much higher than they expected. The price wasn't the big issue for them. It was the timeline. They had just bought this house and wanted to move in as quickly as possible, but now their plans were stalled. On top of that, some of the tradespeople they had lined up weren't going to wait around while the design phase dragged on for months. Their impatience and poor treatment of me ended up biting them hard. As tempting as it might have been to swoop in and save them, I refused. I didn't believe for a second that the mother-in-law would stay out of the process, no matter what her husband promised. And even if she did, I just didn't have the energy or desire to bail her out after the way she treated me. My friend didn't blame me at all. In fact, he admitted it was kind of satisfying to watch her finally face consequences for her attitude, consequences that actually made an impact on her life. That story wraps up here. I think what makes this one stand out is how quickly the whole situation flipped once the engineer walked away. At first, she was so confident that money gave her all the power, but when reality set in, suddenly it wasn't so simple. It's kind of funny how she lectured about how business is conducted when she had no idea how the industry actually worked. Honestly, it feels like she got exactly what she set herself up for, and it's refreshing to hear the friend wasn't upset and actually appreciated the outcome. This next story is about an ex who thought she was still entitled to her former partner's money and support, even after cheating on him. I was with my girlfriend for 11 years. Over that time, I wasn't perfect, but I worked hard and gave her a really comfortable life. I'm not wealthy, but I provided stability. I paid most of her bills, kept a roof over her head, made sure she could get her nails and hair done whenever she wanted, and we always had something going on, whether it was a date night every weekend or a couple of vacations each year. She didn't have to worry much about money, and she got used to that lifestyle. Then I found out she had been cheating on me, not with someone who had it all together, but with a guy who didn't even have a job. That part honestly blew my mind. Here I was, putting in the work to provide, and she was sneaking around with someone who had nothing to offer. She never admitted it outright. I had to piece it together myself. Once I knew, though, I was done. But that's when her sense of entitlement really came out in full force. The first thing she said was that since I had family in the area and she didn't, I should move out of my own place so she and her new guy could stay there. On top of that, she expected me to keep paying the bills while they got settled together. Imagine hearing that. Your long-term partner cheats and then expects you to bankroll her new relationship. It didn't stop there. She told me she wanted to keep my dogs and that I would only be allowed to see them if I asked permission from her new boyfriend. Oh, and because they didn't have money, she said I'd need to keep paying for their food and vet bills. At that point, I'd had enough. I kicked her out, kept my dogs with me, and cut her off completely. She didn't take that well. She got angry and doubled down. She claimed she had to quit her job because I forced her to relocate, something that made no sense. Then she actually tried to sue me for lost wages, as if I was responsible for her employment choices. That case didn't go anywhere, but she wasn't done. Next, she tried coming after my work. She contacted them directly, saying that my actions had cost her everything. She threatened to sue them, and even demanded they settle outside of court with her for $100,000. For context, she didn't even make close to that in a year. Instead of giving her a dime, my job responded by filing harassment charges against her. At this point, most people would have realized it was over and let it go. But she wasn't most people. She started contacting my family members, reaching out to as many as she could find. She told them I ruined her life out of spite just because she moved on, and that the least they could do was send her money to help her pay rent or get a place to live. None of them sent her anything. When that failed, she turned to the internet. She went online, set up her Cash app, and started begging strangers for money. To make it worse, she claimed she was the victim of domestic violence, trying to twist the narrative to pull on people's sympathy. Meanwhile, the reality was simple. She cheated, I cut off my support, and now she didn't know how to function without it. I honestly don't understand how she doesn't get it. We weren't married. We don't have kids. I had supported her for years, and that support ended the moment she betrayed me. I don't owe her a thing, and I definitely don't owe it to her and her new boyfriend to help them get on their feet. The fact that she thought otherwise still amazes me. That's the end of this story. This one left me shaking my head the whole way through. It's wild how someone can cheat, lose everything they were being given, and still feel like they're owed even more. The part about her asking his family for money really stood out. Like, she thought she could guilt trip everyone around him into keeping her lifestyle going, and then trying to spin it online with a fake story? That's just next level entitlement. Honestly, the dog staying with him feels like the biggest win of all. This next story is about neighbors who secretly used someone's backyard pool for years, and what happened when the homeowners finally confronted them face to face. When we first moved into our house, we loved the fact that it came with a pool. It was fenced in, private, and seemed like the kind of thing that would only be used by us, our family, or close friends. We never imagined the neighbors would treat it like their own. At first, we didn't know anything was happening. Our yard had 2 gates, one in the back that was double locked from the inside, and one on the side near the neighbor's garage. That side gate had a double latch system, and you had to reach over the top to release both parts before it opened. Honestly, even I had trouble opening it from the outside. It also had an automatic closer that would latch it again the second you let go. On top of that, we had cameras, one over the garage and a doorbell camera at the front, but we were always careful about how the cameras were angled. We didn't want to record our neighbors coming and going or make them feel like their kids were being watched. Looking back now, we were way more concerned about their privacy than they ever were about ours. Fast forward to this summer. On the morning of July 4th, I was loading a few things into my car to take to my cousin, who had just gotten out of the hospital. My neighbor's husband, who travels a lot for work, walked over and casually asked if I was heading to the lake. I told him no, that we were staying home because of family obligations. Then he asked if we'd be home all weekend. I said yes, one of us definitely would. He quickly wished me a happy holiday and went back inside. The whole interaction felt strange, almost like he was trying to figure out if the coast was clear. Later that day, our friend Mike came over. He works with home automation and security cameras, and my husband loves gadgets. So the two of them started brainstorming upgrades. Cameras around the pool, automated locks for the gate, even some smart home features my husband probably didn't really need. Mike also recommended checking with our homeowner's insurance, since upgrades like that could actually lower our premiums. So the next day, our insurance agent, Tom, came by, and Mike was back with his drone to scout the best camera angles. At one point, I looked outside, and there they all were. My husband, Mike, and Tom walking the yard, pointing at things, the drone buzzing overhead. Naturally, the neighbors started coming outside, curious about what was going on. That's when things really came to light. My husband explained to a couple of them that we were concerned people might have used our pool while we weren't home. And sure enough, 2 neighbors admitted they had seen it happen. Apparently, last year, kids from down the street, including the neighbor's twins, were climbing into our backyard with their friends. One neighbor even asked about it at the time, and the kids had said we gave them permission to swim there whenever they wanted. That was news to us. With confirmation in hand, Tom told us the best thing to do was formally rescind permission. That way, if anything ever happened, there would be no question about liability. So, later that day, when the pool party neighbors came home, my husband walked over with Mike and Tom as witnesses. He kept it calm and respectful. He never accused their kids directly. Instead, he explained that for insurance reasons, we were officially revoking permission for them, their family, or any guest to enter our backyard or use the pool. We'd also be sending a registered letter to put it in writing, He let them know we were upgrading the gates with an automated lock and adding cameras, but we'd make sure not to aim them into their yard or windows. He even framed it as partly for insurance discounts. They exchanged a look, like they both knew exactly why this was happening, but they didn't argue. They just said they understood and appreciated the notice. And that was that. The cameras are going in, the gate is being upgraded, and hopefully the days of surprise pool parties in our backyard are over. That story wraps up here. The part that stuck out to me most was how bold the neighbor's husband was, casually asking if they'd be home that weekend. Like, it almost sounded like he was checking for a window of opportunity. I also think it's kind of funny how respectful the homeowners were about not aiming cameras at the neighbors, only to find out the neighbors had been sneaking in all along. What I liked, though, was how calmly it was all handled. Just setting clear boundaries, putting it in writing, and moving on. Sometimes that quiet firmness speaks louder than any argument could. This next story is about a mom at a children's museum who caused pure chaos by refusing to close a toddler gate and then tried to play the victim when everything spiraled out of control. There's a children's museum in my town. It's a really sweet place, with little activities set up for kids ranging from babies all the way to about 9 years old. The toddler area, for obvious reasons, has a gate that latches shut to keep little ones safe. The whole point is that once kids are in there, they can play without accidentally running into somewhere dangerous. One day, I was there with my child in the toddler area. Everything was normal until one mom, who I'll just call Karen, decided it was time to leave. Her toddler clearly didn't want to go, and instead of just stepping in to pick her child up and walk out, she decided to hold the gate wide open and stand there demanding that her toddler listen. She's calling out things like, "Come on, let's go now," but making no actual move to close the gate or retrieve her kid. You can probably guess what happened next. The second that gate was left open, the other toddlers made a break for it. Suddenly, kids are sprinting in every direction, towards elevators, towards balconies, even into the manager's office. My daughter bolted straight for the stairs. Those stairs are stone and 2 stories high. My heart dropped. I ran after her, but she ducked into the art room, which thankfully was messy but safe. In that moment, I saw another toddler about to reach the stair landing, and there was a grandmother running after him as fast as she could, but she wasn't going to make it in time. I had to make a split-second choice. My daughter was safe in the paint, but this other kid was in real danger. So I snatched him up just before he reached the stairs and handed him back to his grandmother, who was nearly in tears with relief. Meanwhile, chaos was still unfolding. Another dad shouted, "Close the gate," while trying to juggle his twins, one of whom was having a full meltdown while the other tried to escape. And what did Karen do? She yelled back at him that it wasn't her job to watch his kids. Keep in mind, she's still standing there, holding the gate wide open, letting the toddlers pour out. I ended up acting like a human barrier between the kids and the stairs. The art room had turned into a mess of unsupervised kids smearing paint everywhere. My own daughter was covered in yellow by the time I went back for her. It was just madness. Eventually, a manager rushed over after seeing the commotion. 2 dads immediately pointed at Karen as the reason all of this was happening. Only then did she finally scoop up her toddler and shut the gate. And instead of apologizing, she turned around and claimed she felt unsafe because a dad had yelled at her to close the gate. She demanded the manager take action against him. By that point, the rest of us had had enough. I spoke up, along with the grandmother and a couple of dads, explaining exactly what Karen had done, or more accurately, what she hadn't done. Her refusal to close the gate created the whole mess. Instead of owning up to it, she tried to spin the situation like she was the victim. The manager wasn't buying it. He told her she was banned from the museum. That's when she completely lost it, screaming, making a scene, and dragging her 3 kids along while security walked her out. I felt bad for her children because none of this was their fault, but honestly, it was unbelievable how far she went to avoid taking responsibility. If she had just admitted she froze or wasn't thinking clearly, everyone probably would have moved on, but instead she doubled down, and it cost her access to the place altogether. That's the end of this story. What really hit me here was how quickly things got dangerous. 1 second it's just kids playing, and the next, toddlers are sprinting towards stairs and elevators. The dad yelling to close the gate made total sense. It was a split-second emergency, not an attack on her parenting. I also couldn't get over the image of paint everywhere, with kids going wild while parents tried to corral them. The part that really stuck, though, was how she twisted the whole thing around to make herself the victim. That reaction told me more about her than the mistake itself ever could. This next story is about a man who was seriously ill, only to have a nosy coworker spy on his home and accuse him of faking being sick to get out of work. My husband got really sick. So sick that I had to drive him to the emergency room after he passed out from dehydration. He'd been fighting off some kind of intestinal bug for a few days, and it finally got so bad that his body just couldn't keep up anymore. On the way there, he called his job to let them know he wouldn't be in. We pulled into the hospital garage, got one of those little tickets they validate for you, and headed inside. The hospital didn't waste any time. They immediately hooked him up to fluids, gave him medication, and later sent him back for a CT scan. It was a long, stressful night, but at least he was getting the care he needed. That should have been the end of it, but instead, things somehow managed to get even more ridiculous. We found out later that one of his coworkers wasn't happy about being short-staffed. She decided, on her own, that my husband must not really be sick, so she took it upon herself to track down our address and drive over to our apartment to check. Yeah, you heard that right. She literally stalked us. Now here's where it gets even more absurd. Our upstairs neighbor happens to be tall, with light brown hair and kind of a similar build to my husband. The difference? He's about 15 years younger and usually has his baby with him. Well, she apparently spotted him walking outside, assumed it was my husband, and went back to work spreading the story that he was faking his illness. She even told the boss that she personally saw him walking around looking perfectly fine at the exact time he was hooked up to fluids in the ER. The very next morning, my husband gets a call from his boss, saying he's going to be written up for calling out under false pretenses. The boss actually accused him of lying and causing staffing issues. My husband pressed for details, and that's when the boss finally admitted it was based on what this coworker said. That's when my husband shut it down. He told the boss point blank that we had proof he was in the ER during that exact time, and on top of that, he'd be filing an HR complaint. Because not only was this a huge invasion of privacy, but in our state, management legally isn't allowed to ask for health details. And what business does a coworker have driving to our house and spying in the first place? The boss tried to backpedal, saying, well, if you can provide proof, we'll excuse it. My husband just told him, don't worry, you'll get your proof, and hung up. We called HR right away and explained everything. We gave them the time-stamped garage parking ticket from the ER and part of his discharge paperwork that clearly showed when we arrived and when we left. HR took it very seriously. About a week later, an email went out to the entire staff, managers included, reminding everyone about the state law concerning sick leave. There was also a second email, very direct, stating that employees were not to spy on, follow, or otherwise contact other workers outside of the office about their time off. After that, my husband was called into a meeting with his manager, the department head, and that female coworker. And from what he described, the department head absolutely tore into both of them. The coworker's excuse was that the man she saw just looked like him, and she'd been upset about being short-staffed. The manager's excuse was that she had been with the company a long time, so he trusted her word. But here's where things really came to light. Turns out the reason she even knew our address was because the manager regularly let her log into his computer. She had access to private employee information for who knows how long. That didn't sit well with the department head at all. In the end, my husband was told he was free to go, and that he had their apologies for the entire ordeal. Not long after, we found out that the coworker had been fired, and the manager was demoted and shuffled into a different department. That's the end of this story. That coworker really thought she was being a detective, but it blew up in the biggest way possible. I can't imagine the level of entitlement it takes to drive to someone's house just to catch them lying. What stood out most was how calm the husband stayed. He didn't argue, he just went straight to HR with solid proof. The part about her having access to private info for so long is wild though, and honestly, kind of scary. I'm glad the higher-ups actually took it seriously instead of brushing it off, because that could have been a nightmare for so many employees. This next story is about a couple whose friends tried to hijack their low-key elopement into a flashy double wedding, only to wreck their own plans while the original pair protected their day. I'm 38, and I've been married to Mike, who's 35, for 3 years. We've been together for 12. We're quiet, nerdy, and happiest outside with a map, good shoes, and a plan that doesn't involve centerpieces or spotlights. So when the borders started opening at the tail end of the pandemic, we looked at each other and said, let's road trip to Gibraltar and elope. No big guest list, no pressure, just a simple ceremony and a few days to breathe. When we mentioned the idea to our friends, Di and Anne, 2 women we cared about but who loved big gestures, things swerved fast. Right there, they declared it would be a double wedding. They started pitching flashy, pricey add-ons that sounded exactly like the kind of fuss we were trying to avoid. Think all eyes on us moments, custom everything, lots of staged surprises. That wasn't our style. We wanted cliffs, sea air, and a registry office where we could sign, smile, and then go eat something comforting. Travel was the first crack. The plan had been straightforward. 1 rental car, split 4 ways, with Mike and Di sharing the driving. A month before departure, Di and Anne decided trains would be cheaper. 6 different trains across 3 countries. I shut that down immediately. That's when we learned Di didn't even have a valid license and had been driving illegally for years. Mike offered to do all the driving if they still wanted to split the car. They said it was too expensive and stuck with the train plan. It went exactly how you're imagining. Cancellations, lost tickets, long waits in the middle of the Spanish countryside. They missed an entire night in Gibraltar. Meanwhile, we cruised down the coast, took our time, and spent a calm evening in an Airbnb in Cartagena that felt like a secret. Funny twist, their web of train tickets ended up costing more than half the car rental anyway. Lodging was the next round. The original idea was a splurge Airbnb in Gibraltar. Hot tub, view, a place to stretch out, split 4 ways so it was doable. Then Anne dug in. She wanted a real hotel. She bailed on the shared plan. We shrugged and booked a charming 1-bedroom place for ourselves, with a balcony, a hot tub, and a slice of sea framed by rooftops. Dee and Anne, on the other hand, forgot to book anything until the last second and ended up in a rough crash pad by the port. Think loud roundabout, late-night traffic, and a Burger King across the way. No balcony, no bath, not even towels. It cost more than our place and gave them less than nothing in return. They didn't sleep. We slept great. We met them for dinner the night before the wedding. They'd barely arrived after the train odyssey and were already tense. Di tried to salvage the mood with a surprise. She flagged the host, and out came a glossy VIP ice bucket with a fancy champagne. The cork popped, the bottle angled, and Di handed the cork to Anne with a line that was clearly meant to be romantic. Just like the one I gave you in New York, baby. The host poured 2 flutes for them. Anne took a sip, made a face, and loudly declared it corked. We tasted it. It was lovely. The host did not look amused. Then we learned why. The bottle was 750 pounds. The host threatened to call the police when Anne refused to pay. Di wilted and paid. The rest of the evening slid into sulking. Walking back to our place later, I told Mike, calmly and very clearly, that I was done letting them draft our mood. If they wanted to ruin their own trip, that was their choice. Our trip was ours. The ceremony day itself was simple and exactly right for us. The Gibraltar registry office was bright and kind, and I married the man I'd picked every day for 12 years. Di and Anne showed up looking rough from the night before, but we kept it steady. Afterward, we bought them brunch to soak up the leftover alcohol and played photographer, walking them through the park for pictures. We took care with the angles and the light. When Di took photos of us, she somehow had her finger over the lens in every shot. We laughed it off and kept moving. When they suggested we all hit a pub and get properly drunk, we dropped them off out front and I told them the truest sentence of the day. I wanted to be alone with my husband. Dinner plans were round 3. Mike and I and even Di were leaning casual, somewhere friendly, good food, a celebratory dessert. Anne insisted on an upscale fish restaurant that didn't even serve dessert. I don't eat fish at all, so I said no. Anne pushed for a custom wedding cake to be delivered there and wanted us to chip in 200 pounds. We passed. We headed to the best steakhouse in Gibraltar instead, where the staff made us feel like regulars who'd done something right with our lives. I ordered a 1.2 kilo steak and the kind of cheesecake that makes you sit back and just smile. Around 8, a message buzzed in from them. Where are you? We let it sit. Later we found out Anne never made reservations at the fish place, It was fully booked, but they couldn't leave because the custom cake was en route. In the end, they carried a very expensive cake back to that noisy hotel and ate it with credit cards because there weren't plates or utensils in the room. They capped the night with supermarket vodka. Mike and I took a taxi home, stood on our balcony under the stars, and let the day settle in quietly. The next morning was pure us. We hiked all over the rock, inside the UNESCO World Heritage Park, following steps that tilt up into sky and cloud. We had a full English breakfast up at the Sky Restaurant, wandered into St. Michael's Cave, and took 100 mental pictures you can't really share. At one point, a monkey snatched something from Mike and left a bite mark to remember it by. He was fine, and yes, it was honestly pretty funny in that only on this day way. While we were stringing together memories, Di and Anne were stringing together more travel problems. They fought with each other, blamed the entire country, decided to leave on impulse, then got tangled in another mess of trains. 14 hours later, they reached a Spanish beach resort at 11 at night and checked out the next morning. We lingered in Gibraltar for a few more days, and then meandered back up the coast. We booked the same little place in Cartagena we'd loved on the way down, and the host surprised us with a tiny celebration when we arrived. It was gentle and perfect. On the way home, Di and Anne had one more run of bad luck. Stranded again, luggage lost, and COVID to top it off. They wrecked their wedding trip from start to finish. Ours stayed exactly what we wanted. Simple, good, and ours. That story ends there. It's kind of amazing how two people can go on the exact same trip and end up having completely different experiences. I like that they didn't get pulled into the drama, even when things around them were spiraling. It makes you realize how much better it feels to stay focused on what you want, instead of chasing what other people think is exciting. Their friends seemed to be running into one disaster after another, but meanwhile they were just quietly making memories that actually mattered. I think that contrast is what makes the whole story stick. It's funny, but it's also a little eye-opening in its own way. This next story is about a woman who rented a riverside cabin with a private gazebo, only to have an entitled couple show up and announce they were taking it over for their own photo shoot. Every summer in August, I rent the same place along a river in Ontario for about 2 weeks. It's become a little tradition for me, something I look forward to all year. The cabin comes with a private deck, a hot tub, and a fully furnished gazebo that's mine alone to use. Out of all the rentals in the area, mine is the only one with a gazebo, and that's a big part of why I love it so much. Just east of my cabin, there's another rental, a smaller one, and it only has a dock and a hot tub. It's nice, but it doesn't compare. One afternoon, I'd just come back from a quick trip into town to get groceries. I was standing at my cabin door with bags in my hands, ready to unpack, when I noticed a young woman walking straight onto my deck. She was in a bathrobe, clearly fresh from either a shower or the hot tub. Without hesitation, she climbed right onto my space as if she belonged there. She greeted me like nothing was out of the ordinary, and immediately launched into her announcement. She told me that she and her partner would be using my gazebo for a photo shoot the next morning. She said it casually, like it was no big deal, even adding that they'd be moving my boats out of the way to set up, but not to worry. They'd put them back afterwards. I stood there stunned, trying to process the boldness of what she'd just said. The gazebo is attached to my private deck. It's part of my rental. When rain is expected, I store my kayaks in there so they don't get soaked. And during the orientation, the owner of the cabins always makes it crystal clear that each guest has exclusive use of their space. No one else is supposed to come near it. So hearing this woman tell me, point blank, that she would be taking over my gazebo like it was a community area left me speechless. Before I could even get a word out, she started peppering me with questions in rapid-fire fashion. Did I own the cabin? How much did it cost? Was I here alone? Or did I have a husband and kids with me? How long had I been staying here? The questions came so quickly I didn't even have time to answer, and frankly, I didn't want to. Finally, I cut her off. I told her she was in my private space and needed to leave. She gave me this fake, innocent tone, saying she was just being friendly. I wasn't having it. I told her again, firmly, that she was intruding and invading my privacy, and that there would be no photo shoot in my gazebo. That's when her attitude shifted. She got sharper, saying there was no need to be snippy, while using the snippiest voice imaginable. She told me flat out that they would be doing the shoot tomorrow anyway, and that I'd better not interfere. Then she went so far as to suggest that because of my attitude, it would be best if I left for town by 8 in the morning and didn't come back until 2 in the afternoon. The audacity floored me. I didn't raise my voice, but I made it absolutely clear. I told her, "Not happening, get off my deck, get out of my space now." She actually stamped her foot like a child and accused me of being unreasonable. According to her, I was the only one with a gazebo, so I needed to share. I told her again, plainly, "No, I don't. Leave now." I went back inside, locked the door, and immediately messaged the owner. I've been renting from them for years, and by now, we've built a friendship. They know me, and they know I don't cause problems. I explained what happened, and they were not impressed with the couple next door. The next morning, there was no photo shoot. I stayed put, and no one showed up at my gazebo. But the owner told me later that the couple overstayed their checkout time by more than an hour. The owner had to go in and chase them out while they were still lounging in bed. It didn't surprise me. People who act that entitled in someone else's space usually push boundaries wherever they can. That's where this story finishes. It's wild how some people can walk right into a space that clearly isn't theirs and act like they own it. The part that gets me is how she tried to flip it around, saying she was just being friendly when she was really being intrusive. The stamping of the foot made me laugh, though. It's such a childish move for a grown adult. Honestly, I think what makes this stand out is the mix of boldness and cluelessness, all rolled into one. And it's nice knowing the renter held firm and didn't let them walk all over her. This next story is about a guest who tried to open someone's collectible dolls for her granddaughter, ignoring boundaries in a home that wasn't hers. I moved out of my parents' house last year, but they've kept my childhood bedroom exactly the way it was. Every time I come back on weekends to visit and help around the house, it feels like stepping into a time capsule. My clothes are still in the closet, my shelves are lined with toys, and on the highest shelf sit about 10 collector dolls that mean a lot to me. When I was growing up, my dad worked in the United States while the rest of us lived in Canada. He couldn't always be around, so when he did visit, he often brought toys. Some of those dolls were limited editions, and even though I've never thought about selling them, I treasure them because they remind me of him. They've stayed sealed in their boxes all these years. For me, they're not just toys. They're small keepsakes of time with my dad. This past weekend, I was back at my parents' place. My mom had invited a few of her friends over, and one of them, a woman named Jane, brought along her 5-year-old granddaughter. Right away, I told my mom not to let the little girl go upstairs. I've had bad experiences with visiting kids wandering into my room, playing with things they shouldn't, and breaking them. So I made it clear. My room was off limits. I stayed downstairs in another room, working quietly. After a while, though, I started hearing footsteps above me and the sound of doors opening. Then I heard voices. Jane and her granddaughter had gone upstairs anyway. When I heard Jane mention dolls, my stomach dropped. I rushed upstairs and found them in my room. Jane was already standing inside my closet, pointing up at the shelf where the collector dolls were. She pulled one down from the top shelf, showed it to her granddaughter, and then turned to me and said her granddaughter wanted to play with it. I told her firmly, "No, that doll stays in the box. It's not for playing." She gave me a look, irritated, and shoved the box back at me like I was the one being unreasonable. Then she walked out, leaving her granddaughter behind in tears, crying because she wanted that exact princess doll. I didn't want to upset the little girl further, so I went through some of my old things and found a few dolls I had opened and played with when I was younger. I brought them downstairs and offered them, hoping it would distract her, but she refused, still insisting she wanted the collector doll from the box. At least Jane didn't come back into my room again, but the whole situation left me feeling anxious about leaving my belongings at my parents' place. It was unsettling to realize someone felt entitled to walk into my private space and touch things I'd specifically asked to be left alone. Later, my mom told me she wasn't surprised. She explained that Jane visits often, and she has a habit of wandering into rooms that aren't hers. My mom even suggested installing a lock on my bedroom door to keep her out in the future. Honestly, I was baffled. Who just walks into someone else's home, digs through their things, and decides they have the right to open whatever they want? Coming from a South Asian background, I also recognize a cultural layer here. Some older women in the community just don't understand collectible culture, or the sentimentality that comes with keeping certain things in good condition. To them, toys are toys, and gifts are meant to be used, not displayed. They think nothing of opening up boxes or sharing items without asking first. But to me, those dolls are more than plastic. They're gifts from my dad, tied to memories I can't replace. The next day, we did install a lock on my bedroom door. My mom even spoke to Jane directly, telling her not to go in my room again. I may not have space in my condo for all of my belongings yet, but at least I know my things are safe now when I'm not there. That story wraps up here. It's always surprising how differently people view personal space. To some, going through someone else's things is no big deal, but for others it feels like a real violation. What really stands out here is the way entitlement can disguise itself as casual friendliness when it's actually crossing a line. I can imagine how unsettling it must feel to know your belongings aren't safe in your own room. At least now there's a lock, so that sense of security is back. This next story is about a mom at Disney who cut the entire line with her kids, only to get caught and kicked out when everyone decided they weren't going to let her get away with it. I went to Disney recently, and it was my first time back since I was about 9 years old. I'd forgotten just how massive and overwhelming everything feels there. The music playing, the crowds moving in waves, the smell of popcorn and sunscreen mixed together. The lines were way longer than I remembered, but maybe as a kid I was just too excited to notice. Luckily, my friend and I discovered the single rider lanes. The wait times were much shorter, and we didn't mind riding separately. We were just happy to be there and to get on as many rides as possible. So we jumped into the single rider line for one of the bigger attractions, chatting casually with the people around us. That's when it happened. A family of 4 came striding right through the middle of the line, holding hands like they were a parade float cutting straight through everyone. It was a mom, 2 daughters, and a dad trailing behind. You could see the looks of disbelief on people's faces. Some muttered under their breath. Others outright asked them what they thought they were doing. The mom claimed they had forgotten something on the ride and had to go back. The excuse didn't sit right with anyone. They pushed forward, eventually making it into the area where the single rider line, fast pass, and regular line start converging. That's when a woman behind me finally shouted out, "What did you forget?" The energy in the line shifted. Everyone was fuming, realizing in real time that this woman hadn't forgotten anything. She was just trying to cut so she could ride with her kids. Somehow, they got shuffled ahead into the pre-ride movie room before us. My friend and I couldn't believe it. No one had said anything to the staff yet, and this mom was getting away with it. The silver lining was that all of us single riders were now bonding over her boldness and entitlement. It was almost funny how united the whole line had become over one person's selfishness. When my friend and I finally got into the pre-ride area, I decided to speak up. I pulled aside one of the employees and explained what the mom had done, described her kids, the whole situation. The staff member told me that since she was already inside the boarding area, it was tricky to handle. Not exactly what I wanted to hear, but I wasn't ready to let it go. We made it up to the actual boarding line, and sure enough, there they were again. The mom and her 2 kids were just a few spots ahead of us, acting like they belonged. I flagged down another employee and explained again. She nodded, said she'd let someone know, but then walked in the opposite direction of the operators. Meanwhile, the family drama unfolded right in front of us. One of the kids ran over to a man who was standing directly behind my friend and me. She pulled on his arm and called out, "Come on, Dad." Turns out, the father had been hanging back the entire time. He looked embarrassed, keeping his distance as if he wanted no part of the stunt. He let people pass him, his head lowered, while his wife and daughters inched forward toward the ride. By now, the crowd around us was speaking louder on purpose. People were openly criticizing what had happened. You could hear lines like, "What kind of example are you setting for your kids?" And, "Everyone's been waiting just like you? Why do you think you're special?" The mom kept her chin high, ignoring it all, but you could tell it was sinking in. The dad, meanwhile, looked like he wanted to disappear. I hit my breaking point. I wasn't about to watch them get on the ride after walking past hundreds of people who had waited patiently. I leaned over to the group in front of me and asked if they mind letting me through, so I could tell the ride operators directly. They happily stepped aside, clearly just as fed up as I was. When I got to the mom, she was blocking the walkway like a wall. I tapped her gently on the side and said, "Excuse me," staring straight at her until she moved. Then I walked right up to the operator and explained, loud enough for everyone to hear. This lady and her 2 children cut the entire line through the single rider lane, claiming they forgot something. You can ask anyone here. The mom turned to me with the nastiest glare. Pure disgust, like she couldn't believe I'd actually called her out. I walked back to my spot and another woman stepped forward to back me up, telling the operator the exact same story. The mom tried to argue, saying we were both lying, but then the line erupted. Dozens of voices all at once. Everyone around us shouting, confirming what really happened. At that point, there was no way for the mom to talk her way out. The operators escorted her and her kids out a side door, away from the ride. Her husband stayed behind, hanging his head while the rest of us watched her disappear. And as soon as she was gone, the whole line clapped. The sound echoed in that little boarding area, a kind of collective relief that someone entitled hadn't gotten their way. That's where this story ends. There's something kind of satisfying about everyone in a line, standing together like that. Usually people just stay quiet, but in this case, the frustration was so shared that no one wanted to let it slide. The detail about the dad hanging back said a lot, almost like he knew how wrong it was, but couldn't stop it. I can only imagine how awkward that must have felt for him. And the fact that the crowd actually clapped in unison made the whole thing feel like a scene out of a movie. This next story is about a tired parent on a crowded bus who clashed with an entitled passenger sitting in the reserved stroller area. It had already been a long day. I was drained, my wife was drained, and our little one was strapped into his stroller, squirming more and more as the evening dragged on. All I wanted at that point was to get home. But, of course, public transportation had other plans for us. The first bus pulled up and I thought, finally, we could head back. But no, both stroller spots were already occupied. The driver waved us off and we had no choice but to let it go. Standing there on the sidewalk, I could feel my patience wearing thin. Our son started to fidget, kicking his feet against the stroller like he was just as frustrated as I was. Waiting another 30 minutes for the next bus felt like forever. When the second bus finally arrived, I noticed right away it was crowded, but not impossible. Only one stroller was already on board, so I asked the driver if we could squeeze in. He gave me the green light, and for a second, I felt actual relief. We rolled inside, ready to claim the reserved space, when I saw her. Sitting right in the fold-down seat of the designated stroller area was a woman, probably in her 50s. She wasn't just taking up the bench. Her shopping bags were piled up like barricades around her. It was obvious the spot wasn't meant for her or her groceries, but she looked perfectly comfortable treating it like her own little kingdom. I pushed the stroller closer, expecting her to at least notice and move. Nothing. She didn't even glance up. At first I thought maybe she just didn't realize, so I politely pointed out that the area was reserved and I needed to park the stroller properly. That's when the situation turned. She barely looked at me, sighed dramatically, and shoved a few bags to the side, creating the tiniest sliver of space. Not nearly enough for me to fit the stroller safely. The rules were clear. The stroller had to be locked into the correct position so it wouldn't tip if the bus braked suddenly. And here she was, acting like she was doing me a favor by moving an inch. By that point, I was running on fumes. We had already skipped one bus, and I wasn't about to stand there while someone blocked the only spot I needed. So I told her more firmly that she needed to move. My voice probably came out sharper than I meant, but I didn't care anymore. She pushed back. She started going on about how she had groceries, how the bus was crowded, and how I should just make do with the space she'd generously left me. I explained again, calmly but firmly, that it wasn't enough and that it was unsafe. Back and forth we went until the driver finally cut in. He leaned out of his seat and, loud enough for the entire bus to hear, announced that unless the stroller was parked correctly, he couldn't drive. Either she moved or she got off. That shifted everything. Suddenly, the whole bus was staring at her. She wasn't just inconveniencing me anymore. She was the reason everyone else was stuck waiting. With all the grace of a sulking teenager, she yanked up her bags, muttering under her breath, and squeezed into another spot. She kept up a running commentary about how unfair it all was, but instead of sympathy, she just earned a busload of annoyed glares. Eventually, even she realized no one was on her side and went quiet. Meanwhile, we settled the stroller into its proper place. My wife and I ignored her completely, too tired to care anymore. Thankfully, our little one stayed calm for most of the ride, only getting noisy toward the very end. We half juggled him through the last few minutes until, finally, we reached our stop and could escape that exhausting ride. That's the end of this story. Moments like that show how quickly strangers can turn a simple trip into something way more draining than it needs to be. What stuck with me was how the entire bus shifted once the driver spoke up. Suddenly, it wasn't just one parent arguing, it was a whole crowd waiting on her to do the right thing. I can imagine how heavy that stroller must have felt after such a long day, and adding her attitude on top of it just made it worse. Honestly, it's impressive the kid held it together as well as he did. This next story is about a man who was disowned by his family 15 years ago, only for them to suddenly show up in his life again and start stalking him after all that time apart. When I was 19, I went through a rough patch that changed everything. My ID had been stolen and used in another state, which caused my driver's license to get suspended nationwide. On top of that, I already had a couple of tickets I couldn't pay because I was barely keeping up with rent. My full-time job was on the edge of collapse, so I was scrambling with freelance work to stay afloat. I thought if I just held on long enough, I'd catch up and fix things. But that didn't happen. Eventually, I got arrested and spent 2 weeks in jail. It wasn't a violent crime, and in some ways, it cleared out my tickets and forced me to deal with the mess. But to my family, it was unforgivable. They decided I brought shame to the family name, so they disowned me. Just like that, I lost my family, my support system, everything. I only survived because I had just enough to cover rent and kept picking up freelance jobs. 6 months later, I finally cleared the license issue with the other state, but by then, the damage was done. After that, I cut ties completely. I changed my last name, got a new phone number, locked down my social media tighter than Fort Knox, and just started over. I finished college, built my career, and for the first time in my life, I was happy. My circle was small, just a few close friends, but I was content. Then, out of nowhere, 15 years later, there was a knock at my door. It was my parents. I hadn't seen or spoken to them in all that time. I asked how they found me, and my mom admitted they paid $5,000 to a private investigator. They told me it had been long enough, that I'd learned my lesson, and that I'd missed out on so much family life. But all I could say was, yes, I've learned my lesson. One of them being that I can't count on anyone, not even my own family. And yes, I succeeded, but I did it without you. Please leave and don't come back. Then I shut the door. I hoped that was the end of it, but they didn't go away. They started showing up, following me around, basically stalking me. Honestly, they weren't dangerous, just relentless. A friend of mine started calling them fleas, because they just wouldn't leave me alone. We even made a bit of a game out of it. If I had fleas, my friend would come hang out and we'd mess with them. Like going to a fancy restaurant I knew they'd never step into, or walking into an adult store just to watch them squirm. It was funny for a while, but it didn't change the fact that they wouldn't leave me alone. Eventually, I had to face them head on. We met in a park near my apartment, and I told them flat out that this was the only time I would ever talk to them. I even told them I was their judge and jury, and all they could do was explain themselves before I made my final decision. I asked why they disowned me and why they wanted back in now. Their answer was the same old thing, that I had shamed the family, and cutting me off was the only way to make it right. Now that the family had grown with in-laws, nieces, and nephews, they didn't want to keep hiding me anymore. Hearing that, I felt my heart pounding in my ears. I told them I'd done everything alone, and that I didn't need them then, and I don't need them now. I reminded them that the only person who ever stood by me was a cousin by marriage, which is why I even took her last name when I started over. I told them they made their choice 15 years ago, and this was mine now. I warned them that if they kept showing up or following me, I'd go to a lawyer and get the law involved. Then I walked away. Back in my apartment, I locked everything down, pulled the curtains, and finally let it all out. After holding it together through the confrontation, I just broke down and cried. That's where this story ends. Man, that's heavy. 15 years is such a long time to be completely on your own, and then to suddenly have those same people come back like nothing ever happened. It had to feel surreal. What stood out to me is how strong he was in the confrontation, even when he admitted afterward that it left him shaken. That's a lot of weight to carry. I also kind of respect how he and his friend turned it into a joke for a while, messing with them instead of letting it eat away at him. But at the end of the day, setting that hard boundary was the only way forward. It's a rough situation, but you can tell he's not going back. This next story is about a bride who came up with a clever way to handle her controlling mother, who tried to upstage her by wearing a wedding gown to her own daughter's wedding. Earlier this year, my wife and I received an invitation to the wedding of an old shipmate of mine from my Coast Guard days. I'll call him Chief and his fiancée Chiefette. We were excited to go. I called Chief to formally accept, mailed the RSVP, and we set aside the travel funds. Everything seemed perfectly normal. Then, a couple of weeks later, Chief called again with a strange request. He explained that Chiefette's mother had decided she was going to wear her own wedding gown to the ceremony. Instead of getting into a battle with her, the bride had come up with a different idea. She wanted every female guest to wear white, or even a wedding gown if they had one. Chief asked if my wife would wear hers. My wife was thrilled. She could still fit into her dress, and she laughed that she'd probably never get another chance to wear it again. So, when the big day came, I put on my suit and she walked beside me in her gown. When we arrived, the room was already filled with women in white, some in full gowns, others in simple white dresses. The atmosphere felt almost like a secret alliance, everyone waiting to see what would happen when the bride's mother showed up. I joined Chief outside just as his future mother-in-law arrived. She stepped out of the car in an explosion of tulle, like she was auditioning for a fairy tale. Her dress was massive, dramatic, and completely over the top. She strutted up with her chin high, clearly braced for someone to challenge her. But Chief just smiled, welcomed her, and held the door open. When she walked inside and saw about 20 women, all dressed in white, her face froze. She went from smug to outraged in seconds. She started screaming at everyone, calling them shameful for wearing white to her daughter's wedding, and demanding that they leave immediately. Her husband, looking mortified, quietly reminded her that she herself was in a wedding gown at her daughter's wedding. She shouted back, "That's different. I'm her mother." But when it came out that her daughter had personally asked all the women to wear white, her fury deflated. She looked stunned, like she couldn't believe she'd been outmaneuvered. A few minutes later, the music started, and we all filed into the chapel. Then the real twist. Chiefette walked in wearing a breathtaking gown of red and gold. The moment she appeared, all eyes were on her, exactly as it should have been. Her mother left almost immediately after the ceremony, clearly defeated. Later at the reception, I found out the whole plan had been inspired by posts the bride had read on Reddit. She had turned the drama into her own moment of victory, and honestly, it was brilliant. That's where this story ends. That was such a clever move. Instead of fighting her mom head-on, the bride found a way to flip the whole situation so the spotlight was exactly where it belonged. What I love about it is that it wasn't aggressive. It was playful, but it still made the point crystal clear. The image of all those women standing there in white, only for the bride to sweep in wearing red and gold, must have been incredible. It's one of those moments you can just picture everyone in the room remembering forever. This next story is about a toxic parent who tried to twist her child's words during a family crisis and ended up destroying her own future in the process. The closest person in my entire life has always been my grandmother. She was the one who saved me when I was growing up, because my mother was abusive. Whenever my mom threw me out of the house, which happened several times when I was between 13 and 16, I knew I could always take a taxi in the middle of the night to my grandma's place. She'd come downstairs in her robe, pay the fare, and take me inside like it was the most natural thing in the world. When I had thoughts of hurting myself, she was the one I'd call, or the one I'd run to. She's my mother's mother, but even she knows her daughter is cruel and destructive. She's never once denied what kind of person my mom is, and she's seen firsthand the pain I've been through. A few years back, my grandma suddenly collapsed. She couldn't breathe. Her heart barely responded, and she was rushed to the hospital unconscious. The doctors didn't give us much hope. After 3 months of her lying there, they told us we should start considering hospice care. They asked if we wanted her intubated again, if she stopped breathing, or if we should let her go. By then, I hadn't spoken to my mom in years. But in that situation, I ended up talking to her again. One day, she called me in tears, asking me what to do. Should we keep Grandma on the machines? Should we let her go? I loved my grandmother more than anything, but I also knew what she wanted. She had always said she never wanted to be kept alive, like a vegetable. She was proud, independent, and strong. So I told my mom. She's still alive now, so we hold on to that. But if she goes to hospice, I don't think we should prolong her life by force. And in that moment, everything flipped. My mom's voice changed completely. She laughed and yelled, "Ha! Got you. I knew you wanted her gone. I recorded this, you idiot. Now everyone will know, and the inheritance will be mine." She mocked me, telling me she'd use that recording to prove I wanted to end my grandma's life. 2 days later, against all odds, my grandma woke up. Slowly, she regained her strength. It took 6 months of recovery, but she fully came back, and she's been doing well for 6 years since then. But my mom didn't stop. She started visiting my grandma, playing that recording over and over, claiming I wanted to off her. My grandmother's response? She'd just tell her to shut up, saying, "I wouldn't want to spend the rest of my life on a ventilator either." She was right. My grandma knew exactly what I meant, and she never once believed my mom's lies. Eventually, my grandmother made a new will, one that couldn't be challenged, one signed off by lawyers and psychologists. She disinherited my mother completely. If my mom had just acted like a decent human being, she would have inherited something by default. But now, she'll get nothing. That's where the story ends. That was brutal, but honestly kind of satisfying. The way the mom tried to twist that phone call into some kind of trap just shows how far she was willing to go. What stood out to me was how solid the grandmother was. She didn't fall for it, not even for a second. Instead, she doubled down on protecting the one person who had been there for her. It's wild to think how different this could have gone. But in the end, the mom ended up outsmarting herself. This next story is about a trip to the park that turned into chaos when a family tried to take someone's dog, and things nearly turned into a fight. I've got 2 dogs, an older Chihuahua who's calm and steady, and a younger Cheagle who's playful to the point of being chaotic. One afternoon, I figured they could both use some exercise, so I packed up a gallon of water, collapsible bowls, a couple treats, and their favorite toys. The day was warm, but not unbearable, with just enough breeze to make the park inviting. I loaded them into the car, and off we went. When we arrived, the park wasn't crowded. A couple families were nearby, and some people were playing volleyball a little ways off. I found a big open spot where there was plenty of space for the dogs to run, then let them loose. My Chihuahua, who I'll call Jay, stayed close to me, lounging near her water bowl and her stuffed toy. Meanwhile, my Chiggle, let's call her C, was in full zoomy mode, sprinting across the grass, tail wagging so hard her whole back end shook. She has that type of personality where she sees fun happening anywhere, and immediately wants to join in. For about 5 minutes, things were perfect. I threw their ball around, tried not to get bowled over by C crashing into my legs, and just enjoyed the sunshine. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed C's attention lock onto a group of kids playing near a van. Before I could stop her, she darted across the grass like a rocket, heading straight for them. I whistled, clapped, called her name, everything I normally do to get her back, but she was too excited and kept going. At first, I wasn't worried. C is friendly, and I figured one of the kids would hold her until I got there. She bounced around their feet, tail wagging like crazy. One of the kids bent down and started petting her, and for a second I thought, good, they'll keep her put. But then I saw something that made my stomach drop. The kid's mom bent down, scooped C up, and put her straight into her child's arms. She immediately shut the van door behind them, saying, "Go, go," as if she was in a rush to get out of there. That's when I started shouting, "Hey, that's my dog, stop," and made my way over as fast as I could with my cane. My heart was pounding, partly from the effort and partly from panic. Before I could reach them, though, a man, who I assumed was the father, stepped out of the van and blocked me. He put his hand on my chest to stop me, and because I was walking quickly, I nearly lost my balance. I steadied myself and yelled again that they had taken my dog. Then another man, maybe an uncle, came around and got in my face. He wagged his finger at me like I was a child and said, No, he's ours. We found him. We adopted him. Legally." That word, legally, nearly made me laugh out of disbelief. They had literally just scooped my dog off the grass, and now they were pretending it was theirs. The father cut him off and jabbed a finger into my chest, saying I better back away. At that point, I raised my cane and told them not to push me any further and to give me back my dog. Meanwhile, the mom was across the van holding onto her kid, shouting that I already had one dog and that her kid deserved this one. The whole thing felt unreal. Like, they truly thought they were entitled to just claim someone else's pet because they wanted to. While this was happening, Jay, my Chihuahua, trotted over, and stood behind me, almost like she knew something was wrong. I told her to get to the car, and she immediately turned and ran that way. That gave me some relief, but C was still in their arms. My hands were shaking, partly from anger, partly from fear, because I honestly thought this could turn physical. Thankfully, that's when two women who had been nearby walked over. One of them spoke up loudly, saying, "No, that's not right. We were here when he arrived, and those are his dogs." That was enough to make the father pause. He turned to the kid, took C out of their arms, and set her down on the ground. She sprinted back toward me, tail wagging, totally oblivious to the fact that she'd almost been stolen. The kid holding her just said, "Ah, bye doggy, you're cute," like it was no big deal. Meanwhile, the uncle threw out one last threat, saying I better not show up again, or I'd regret it. They piled back into their van, glaring at me the whole time, and drove off. The two women who had stepped in asked if I was okay, and I thanked them over and over. Without them, I don't know how that would have ended. I gathered up the toys C had dropped in her excitement, walked back to the car, and loaded up both dogs. By the time we got home, I was still shaking, part fear, part anger, but also just relieved. My dogs were safe, and that was all that mattered. That's where this story ends. This one is just wild. The entitlement of trying to claim someone else's dog right in front of them is on another level. What's crazy is how calm the bystanders had to be to step in and call it out, and that ended up being the turning point. I think what stood out most is how quickly things could have gone way worse, but instead it ended with the dogs safe and a couple of strangers proving how important it is to speak up when something looks off. And honestly, picturing the dog running back all excited, like nothing even happened, almost makes it feel surreal after all that tension. This next story is about a mother who ignored every boundary and threw a gender reveal her daughter never wanted, without even including her. This happened almost 2 years ago, back when I was pregnant. For some background, my mom has always been narcissistic and controlling. She pretended to soften up once my siblings and I became adults. But the second I got pregnant, it was like a switch flipped. Suddenly, everything had to be her way. And if I resisted, she would scream that I was making it all about me, when in reality, she was the one making it all about her. One of the first things she demanded was a gender reveal. I had no idea why she cared so much, since she never had one when she was pregnant with me or my brothers. Even they started pressuring me about it, and when I asked why, all I got was, "Because we want to." Personally, I've never been into the idea of gender reveals. My husband agreed, so I told my mom no. To offer something small, I said we could add pink filters to the ultrasound photos, but that wasn't good enough for her. Without telling me, my mom started planning a full gender reveal anyway. She picked a weekend when I was supposed to visit and organized a virtual party, complete with pink decorations. I only found out because my dad mentioned it in passing. When I confronted her, she insisted she was compromising by making it virtual instead of in person. I tried to explain that this wasn't a matter of compromise, it just wasn't something I wanted at all, but she wouldn't listen. From there, the pressure got worse. My mom, my brothers, even my dad, all hounded my husband and me to just go along with it. My dad actually asked me to do it to keep the peace. After weeks of fighting about it, my mom came to me acting meek, like she suddenly understood. She said she respected that I didn't want to party, but had bought some pink poppers on sale. She asked if, when we visited, we could just pop them and take a few photos with my husband, my dad, and my brothers. The way she asked was so different from how she had been before that I felt caught off guard. I finally agreed, figuring a couple of silly pictures wouldn't hurt. Then, a week before the visit, my phone blew up with calls and texts congratulating me on having a baby girl. My husband and I had only shared the news with immediate family at that point, since I had previously suffered a late miscarriage and wanted to be careful. Confused and upset, I checked my messages and realized what happened. My mom had thrown the gender reveal without me. She moved the date up, hosted the whole event while I was in another state, filmed it, and sent the video to everyone in my family, but not me or my husband. She didn't even include his family, even though she had their contact info. Hours later, she finally sent the video to me. In it, my brothers are breaking a piñata that bursts with pink powder. My mom can be heard proudly saying, "That's right, we're having a girl," as if it was her baby. Then everyone popped the pink poppers. Watching it, I just sat there in disbelief. When I finally got her on the phone, I asked why she went behind my back and excluded me from my own pregnancy announcement. Her response? You didn't want the gender reveal anyway, so I don't know why you're upset. I was furious. Not only had she done exactly what I asked her not to do, but she also stole a moment that should have been mine and my husband's to share. I was so upset that I canceled my trip to visit her the following weekend and instead spent time with my husband's family. That's actually when my husband and I decided to honor his late mom by giving our daughter her middle name. Looking back now, the absurdity of my mom's behavior makes me laugh, but at the time, it was one of the most frustrating experiences of my pregnancy. That's the end of this story. It's crazy how far some people will go just to be in control of something that isn't theirs. What stood out to me is how the mom twisted it around and tried to act like she was the one being reasonable when she was the one bulldozing boundaries. The whole "we're having a girl" line in the video says it all. It wasn't about celebrating, it was about making it hers. Honestly, the fact that it ended up inspiring the name choice adds a little silver lining, but the whole reveal stunt is still one of the most over-the-top things I've heard. This next story is about a cousin's fiancé who decided to interfere in something deeply personal, criticizing someone for calling their adoptive parents mom and dad. When I was just 3 years old, my life changed completely. My dad passed away in a car accident, and my mom, unable to cope, slipped into heavy drinking and eventually drug use. It reached the point where my dad's family stepped in. With the help of the courts, I was taken out of her custody, and not long after, my father's sister, my aunt, and her husband adopted me. My biological mom passed away about a year later, and from that point on, my aunt and uncle became my parents in every way that mattered. By the time I reached middle school, I started calling them mom and dad. It felt natural, and honestly, it felt right. Everyone in my family seemed fine with it, or at least no one ever questioned me about it, until this past Memorial Day weekend. We went to my grandparents' place on my mom's side of the family. They've got a big property, 2 acres, so it's the kind of spot where everyone gathers for holidays. This time, I got to meet one of my cousin's fiancés for the very first time. And let's just say she gave off a spoiled, attention-grabbing vibe. She seemed like the type who'd announce a pregnancy at someone else's wedding, if that gives you an idea. One afternoon, a group of us were sitting around a table outside. Me, my parents, my cousin, his fiancé, and his parents. Out of nowhere, she looks at me and says, "It's crazy how much you look like your mom. You look nothing like your dad." Then she turned to my dad and added, "You sure she's yours?" It landed flat, and the only sound was a couple of forced chuckles. My mom stepped in to explain, telling her how I was actually her brother's daughter, and that she and my dad had been raising me since I was little. That's when the fiancé turned back to me and said, "But you just called them mom and dad a few minutes ago." I told her, "Yeah." She pressed on with, "Why?" I was already annoyed at this point, so I said, because I can. It's what I want to call them." She wrinkled her nose and shot back, "But that's weird. They're not your mom and dad. I don't like it." At that point, I couldn't help myself. I just said, "Oh, okay. I'll make sure to write that down in my notes." The table went dead silent after that, and I excused myself to go hang out with my grandma. I figured that was the end of it, but the next morning, I walked into the kitchen and saw my mom, my grandparents, and the fiancé already in there. I walked right up, hugged my mom, and said, "Good morning, Mom." The fiancé looked straight at us and said, "I already told you I don't like it when you call them that. They're your aunt and uncle, not your parents." My grandpa didn't even hesitate. He just turned to her and said, "It's none of your business what the girl calls them. Mind your own business." After that, she didn't talk to me much for the rest of the weekend, but she kept giving me weird looks anytime we crossed paths. Honestly, I just feel bad for my cousin who has to deal with her. That's the end of this story. It's wild to me how someone could feel entitled to step into something so personal, especially when the rest of the family clearly understands and accepts it. The way the fiancé kept doubling down even after it was explained to her says a lot. What stood out most was the grandpa shutting it down so quickly. Sometimes that kind of blunt response is exactly what's needed. And honestly, the little comeback about writing it down in my notes was such a perfect way to handle that awkward moment. It's one of those situations where you can only shake your head at how unnecessary the drama was. This next story is about a neighbor's friend who kept encouraging her child to steal cookies, insisting it was teaching her to share. So this was my first time trying crumble cookies. I'd bought 4 of their giant cookies, planning to take them home and share with my brother and friends. On the way back, I sat down at one of the little picnic tables outside my condo, figured I'd enjoy the one cookie I picked out for myself, while also catching up on errands on my phone. Not long after, I noticed someone walking over. It was my neighbor's friend, who happens to be one of those entitled parents. I'd run into her once before, and it hadn't gone well. I kept my head down, eating my cookie, when I suddenly heard her say to her daughter, "Look at that, Olivia. There's 3 giant cookies in that box." Then she pointed right at me. "Why don't you go ahead and pick one out? It's important to learn how to share." Maybe this lady has learned her lesson from last time. That comment caught me off guard because the last time she was talking about was when I had 2 candy canes with me. I'm a type 1 diabetic, and my blood sugar was low. Those candy canes were literally medicine in that moment. So no, I didn't hand one over to her kid. Before I could even react, her daughter started running up to grab one of my cookies. Luckily, I was quicker. I shut the box right before she could touch it, and the look of shock on her face was almost cartoon-like. The mom let out this loud, irritated grunt and snapped at me. "Oh, come on. You don't need all those cookies." I'm trying to teach her to share when people have more than they need. Instead of engaging with her, I looked directly at the little girl and said gently, "Do you want to learn something really important?" She nodded. I explained, "You should never take food from a stranger, because you don't know what's in it. What if you're allergic to something in these cookies? That could make you very sick." She nodded again, more serious this time. I went on. "Another thing to remember is that sometimes we don't always get what we want. These cookies might look good, but I promised I'd share them with the people I know, and they'd be sad if I didn't. So it's always better to ask before taking something from someone." The little girl actually smiled at me after that, said okay, and even thanked me. I told her, "Next time if you ask nicely and your mom says it's okay, I'll share a piece of candy with you, but only if it's safe for you." Meanwhile, her mom looked like she was ready to explode. She didn't say much else, just grabbed her daughter by the arm, stormed off, and disappeared into one of the nearby buildings. Honestly, the whole thing was kind of satisfying. Not only did I stop her from taking something that wasn't hers, but I actually got to teach the kid a couple of lessons her mom clearly wasn't teaching. That's where this story ends. That was one of those situations where the parent clearly wanted to create drama, but it completely backfired. What stood out to me was how quickly the kid understood once it was explained in a calm way. Meanwhile, the mom just looked worse the angrier she got. It's funny how sometimes the best move isn't to argue back, but to just redirect the focus. And honestly, the mental image of her storming off while her kid smiled politely is what makes this whole story stick. This next story is about a dad who tried to use his child's disability as an excuse to let his kids run wild, only to end up getting called out by the cafe staff. Every Sunday, I have this little routine. I go to the same bubble tea shop, order a drink, and sit in the same corner tucked into the wall. It's my quiet spot, away from all the noise of the cafe, and it helps me reset for the week. Because of my OCD and being on the autism spectrum, little rituals like this are a big deal for me. If I miss it, my whole sense of time and rhythm for the week gets messed up. Most weeks that corner is taken, so I just sit somewhere else until it frees up. But on this particular Sunday, the spot was actually open. I slid right into it, already feeling some relief. A man across the room gave me a death stare, but I ignored him and pulled out my tablet to get some schoolwork done. His 2 kids, though, were running wild, tossing balloons, making noise, basically treating the cafe like a playground. Not long after, the little girl, maybe 7 years old, crawled right into my quiet corner with her balloon. She was loud, bouncing around, and had 0 sense of personal space. I didn't want to scare her, so I just kind of froze and stared until she wandered off. A few minutes later, she came back, this time with her brother. He seemed about the same age, and something about the way he moved and how he was dressed made me think he might be special needs too. Again, they started crawling around near my tablet, nearly stepping on it. I tried to be polite and said, "Excuse me?" But they didn't listen. Eventually, they ran back to their dad. A moment later, he marched over with both kids and told me I should let them play there because there's enough space. I explained that my tablet was right there, and I needed quiet to focus. That's when he hit me with, "Well, my son is autistic." I told him calmly, "I'm autistic too, and I need my peace and quiet." Instead of backing off, he started arguing, saying I was clearly less autistic than his son, whatever that's supposed to mean. At that point, I snapped a little and told him flat out that it wasn't a competition, and that using his kid's disability as an excuse for bad behavior was just terrible parenting. His kids could still have fun, they just didn't need to be crawling all over me to do it. He didn't like that and tried to escalate by calling over a barista, hoping she'd take his side. But since I'm a regular, the staff already knew me. The barista looked at him and basically told him to get his kids under control, or they'd all be asked to leave. He stormed back to his seat, defeated, while I went back to my drink and my work. It was instant karma, but the nerve of him to try to downplay my disability just so his kids could be disruptive was wild to me. That's the end of the story. What stood out the most here is how the dad turned it into some weird competition instead of just parenting his kids. Like, nobody's disability should be used as a free pass to bother others. I also thought it was pretty great that the cafe staff stepped in right away, instead of letting him spin the story. Sometimes people expose their own entitlement without even realizing it. This next story is about a dad who tried to pass off his 11-year-old daughter as 13 so she could act as the legal guardian of her siblings at a fitness center. I was managing the front desk one evening at our fitness center, which is attached to a hotel. It was a pretty normal night, nothing unusual, until I noticed a kid walk straight through the lobby like she owned the place. It was Lily, the daughter of one of our most difficult regulars, Mr. Thompson. She couldn't have been more than 11, but she walked confidently, heading toward the back of the building without even glancing at the desk. I stopped her and asked where her dad was. She froze, just stood there staring like her brain had hit pause. I'd met her before, and I knew her dad well enough to remember the time he casually asked me if I babysit, then told me all about his 3 kids. So I knew she wasn't supposed to be wandering around unsupervised. Not even a minute later, her dad strolled in, cool as ever, pretending the rules didn't exist. I told Lily to go back to him, since children had to be supervised. She didn't budge, just stood in place. When I reminded Mr. Thompson of the rule, he shrugged and asked, even if they're just near the locker rooms? I told him yes. Supervision means supervision, no matter the spot. That's when he hit me with, well, Lily's 13. She can watch them. Just like that, his 11-year-old magically aged up to 13 and suddenly became a qualified guardian. The problem is, I remembered him telling me just a few months back that Lily was 11, so I pointed out that supervision requires someone over 18, not a kid who just finished elementary school. He didn't like that, so he asked to see the policy. As I pulled out the paperwork, he muttered that something else must be going on here. At that point, I told him straight up, we'd had multiple reports about him in the past, and I stepped in because I didn't want my team dealing with it again. To jog his memory, I reminded him of a few highlights, like the time his kids were running wild on the track and using equipment, and he argued that the hydro massage chairs weren't really equipment, or when he refused to sign liability waivers for his kids but still wanted them using the facility anyway. Back in the present, I checked if Lily was even on his account. She wasn't. I told him even if she was 13, she'd either need to be officially added or pay a guest fee. He tried one last loophole, asking if his kids could just sit in the cafe. I explained again. The cafe is still part of the facility, and the rule doesn't change. Before he could argue more, Lily grabbed his arm and pulled him out of the lobby. The whole time, she didn't say a single word. She just stared at the floor, clearly embarrassed and wishing she could disappear. It was obvious she knew her dad was lying, and the way she dragged him out said more than anything else could. That's where the story ends. What stuck with me most here is how the daughter reacted. She didn't say a word, but you could tell she was embarrassed and tired of being put in those situations. It's one thing when an adult acts entitled, but dragging your kid into it just feels rough. I also thought it was wild how the dad kept inventing loopholes, like suddenly making the cafe its own universe where rules don't apply. Honestly, the patience it must take to deal with that guy on a regular basis is impressive. Sometimes the way kids handle these moments is more mature than the parents themselves. This next story is about a son who uncovered years of hidden family secrets after learning the truth about his biological father. Growing up, I always knew the man raising me wasn't my biological father. It wasn't some shocking revelation. Mom had told me from the start. The story she gave me was simple. My biological father didn't want to be a dad, and walked away as soon as he found out she was pregnant. It stung, but I told myself it didn't matter because the dad I had loved me, and that was enough. Things changed when I was about 12. I started struggling with some health issues, and doctors kept asking for family medical history. That's when the gap in my background started to matter. Mom said she reached out to my bio father, but according to her, he refused to help. She told me he didn't care if I was sick or not, and that hit me hard. I'd get upset sometimes, thinking about it, and my dad, the one who raised me, was the person who comforted me. He would sit with me and reassure me, saying I wasn't less loved just because of that missing piece. Still, every time I had to explain to a new doctor that half my medical history was blank, it reminded me of how little my biological father supposedly cared. Fast forward a few years, and my aunt, mom's sister, pulled me aside. She told me that maybe things weren't exactly what they seemed, and that I should consider searching for answers myself. She wouldn't say more, but her words stuck with me. So eventually, I did a DNA test through 23andMe. The results connected me to a paternal aunt, and suddenly the story I'd been told all my life began to unravel. My aunt was shocked to learn about me. She insisted that her brother, my biological father, had no idea I even existed. She helped bridge the gap, setting up contact, and eventually, I met him face to face. When we met, he already had medical information ready for me. He told me my condition was something inherited from his side, and he said he would even be a donor if I ever needed one. He apologized over and over, swearing that he had never been told about me. He explained that he and my mom broke up because she cheated on him, and then he never heard from her again. Hearing all this was overwhelming, but the medical info alone was life-changing for my treatment. Eventually, I confronted my mom. At first, she tried to double down, saying it was all lies. When I pressed, she admitted the truth. She lied so she could build a normal family with my dad. She said she never told my bio father, even when I got sick, because she wanted to keep things the way they were. It broke something in me, and it broke something in my dad, too. He was furious that she had lied to him for their entire marriage and denied me the chance to know my biological father. He felt like she'd made him part of the lie against his will, and on top of that, she'd put my health at risk by withholding important information. Now, my parents' marriage is over. Dad has moved out and filed for divorce. My relationship with mom is basically ruined. And my siblings, they blame me for the fallout, even though all I did was search for the truth. That's where the story ends. What gets me about this one is how long a single lie managed to ripple through everyone's lives. It's not just the health piece, though that's huge. It's the trust that shattered once the truth came out. And it's tough because the dad who raised him clearly cared, but now he's left carrying the weight of a secret he never agreed to. This next story is about a stepdad who tricked his stepson out of a laptop, only to later get tricked himself in a much bigger way, involving his car. About 13 years ago, I was in my late teens, living on my own and really struggling financially. I didn't have much, but one of the few things I owned was an old laptop. It stopped working properly, and while I knew my way around using computers, I wasn't great at fixing them. I tried searching online for solutions, but couldn't figure it out. So, I asked my stepdad to take a look. He fiddled with it for a minute, then shrugged and told me it was broken beyond repair. He added that if I didn't want it, he'd take it off my hands. Since I thought it was useless, I said sure. 10 minutes later, I walked back into the room, and there he was, using the laptop like nothing had been wrong. I asked if he fixed it, and he just smirked and said, "Yeah, thanks for the laptop." I was furious. My mom refused to get involved, and his only excuse was that he'd done a quick internet search to find the fix, implying I could have done the same. Keep in mind, I was broke at the time, and he already had both a PC and another laptop. Losing one of my only possessions like that stung. Months later, I went to visit my mom and stepdad. That's when an idea hit me. I might not know much about repairing computers, but when it came to cars, especially Audis, I was confident. My stepdad had a 2001 Audi A3, and I decided to get a little creative. Before going inside, I slid under his car and quickly unplugged the oil level sensor and a vacuum line for the turbo. Later, when he went to start the car, the dashboard lit up with oil warning lights, and the turbo wouldn't boost. He turned it off right away, looking worried. I strolled out casually and asked what was wrong. He muttered that it looked like catastrophic turbo failure, or maybe even full engine failure. He'd already spent quite a bit on repairs and didn't want to sink more money into it. He told my mom he was thinking of cutting his losses and scrapping the car. I asked him what a scrapyard would give for it, and he said about 100 pounds. That's when I graciously offered him 120 pounds to take it off his hands. I played it off like I might just part it out. He agreed, signed over the logbook, wrote me a receipt, and handed over the keys. I walked outside, lifted the hood, pulled out my phone to pretend I was searching something, then slipped back under the car. I reconnected the vacuum line and the oil sensor, hopped in, and started it up. The engine purred, no warnings on the dash, turbo working perfectly. I drove it around the block, came back, and gave him a thumbs up. His jaw dropped. He was absolutely livid. All I said was, "Guess you could have found the solution too with a quick internet search." He tried to argue that it wasn't fair, that since the car was fine, I shouldn't keep it. But I reminded him how he tricked me out of my laptop and pointed out that he had already signed it over. My mom just laughed and said she wasn't getting involved. To this day, I still have that Audi. It's practically in showroom condition and runs beautifully. That's where this story ends. What gets me here is the perfect symmetry. He took a laptop with a smug, "You should have Googled it," only to lose a whole car to the exact same line. It's the kind of quiet comeback that doesn't need yelling. The irony speaks for itself. And the fact you still have the car all these years later makes it feel like the win just keeps paying off. Anyways, that wraps up today's lineup of stories, and I hope it was a chill listen. If there are subreddits you'd like me to pull stories from, or if you have any video ideas in general, drop them down in the comments. And if you had a good time, hitting like and subscribe goes a long way. Thanks again for hanging out, and I'll see you in the next one.